Thank you all for coming this morning. You know, there's always some difficulty when you have a lot of wonderful exhibitors and breakfast outside and a program starting in theory at 8 o'clock or 8:05 and it's already 8:13 and everyone's having a nice time chatting, and networking is a big part of why we come to these events. So I always hate to kind of interrupt that and start with the program, but nonetheless, the show must go on, and we have a really tight schedule and a terrific schedule of speakers and panelists, and a ton of information I think that's going to be shared today that should help everybody in the room leave here smarter about how they're consuming energy in their business, and learning a lot. So my name is Peter Stanton. I'm the publisher of the Worcester Business Journal, and I want to say a special thank you to all of our sponsors. Our presenting sponsor, National Grid, who's been a partner in this event for 7 straight years. Our corporate sponsor, Hess Energy, who's also been a great supporter of the Mass Energy Summit for several years. And supporting sponsors, Conover & Company, World Energy, and WPI, as well as our media partner. And if you saw, there's a fellow out on the right, just opposite the breakfast area, who's on the radio. They're doing a live broadcast here on WCRN until 9 o'clock. So we're getting some nice media coverage, and we hope that you all get a lot out of today. So I'm going to be asking our sponsors, National Grid and Hess Energy, to come up and make a couple of comments, and then we'll get into introducing the program. But I wanted to just say one special note before I introduced Ed White from National Grid. And there's a picture up here, and that's of Chip Marinero. And since we first put on our first Energy Summit in 2007, we've been working with National Grid, as I mentioned. And one of the folks in their team that we've relied on for his deep knowledge and expertise was Chip. And some of you may know that he passed away earlier this year. He was a 26-year veteran of National Grid, and he was either a panelist or a moderator at many of our energy summits. And if he wasn't up on the stage, he was generously giving his time and his expertise to any attendee who had a question. So for those of you who knew Chip and were aware of how dedicated he was to his wife Karen and his 4 kids, and what a passion he had for his work, I'm sure you will miss him, and we certainly will as well. So, okay. And so for the first remarks, I'd like to invite up Ed White, who's the Vice President on Customer and Business Strategy for National Grid. Ed.
Hey, good morning, everyone. As Peter said, my name's Ed White from National Grid. Customer and Business Strategy is oftentimes defined as a lot of the fun things at National Grid. So when you think of the energy efficiency programs, our renewable programs, our electric vehicle charging programs, and something you'll see later on in the agenda today, our Smart Energy Solution Program. Bill Jones from National Grid will be here to talk about that and give you an update of what we're doing here in the great city of Worcester. I'm pleased to be here. I'm pleased that National Grid's a sponsor. This is a great event to really connect and mingle with a lot of you all. You're passionate about the energy industry. You definitely want to learn more and be part of the dialogue, and I commend you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here. As you probably noticed, I'm not wearing the traditional conference garb that a lot of you are wearing with your shirts and ties. I did that intentionally, and as I think about the journey the utility industry has been on, it's actually not unlike the journey the Red Sox have been on. And if you think about the early 1900s when the utility industry was just getting up and going, a lot of the infrastructure that we installed back then is still some of the infrastructure we rely on today, scary as that may sound. And if you think about 2004, 2007, we started to see the Red Sox revitalize themselves and make a run at the World Series, and we're starting that off a little bit this afternoon, or later tonight, I should say, with another World Series run. And if you think about the utility industry, 2004, we were doing award-winning energy efficiency programs across the Commonwealth, not just at National Grid, but beyond that. And in 2007, leading to 2008, and I'm sure the Energy Secretary will note this in his remarks, we came up with the Green Communities Act in 2008, right after the Red Sox won the World Series in 2007. And so we've been on this journey in parallel with the Red Sox, so I thought it was appropriate to wear the jacket in honor and support of not only what we're doing to support our local baseball team, but also what the local industry is doing. And so I would be remiss if I didn't invite you all on your own time, at your leisure, to come find out what we're going to be doing now and into the future with regard to energy at our Sustainability Hub. I'm just going to take 1 minute to describe what we're doing at the Sustainability Hub, which is at 912 Main Street here in the great city of Worcester. It's on the campus of Clark University, and there you can go find out more about what's happening in the energy industry, in the world of sustainability, find out about energy efficiency programs, renewables, and all the good work that we're doing around having a dialogue around energy that is really unprecedented in the last 100 years. So I encourage you to sit back, check out the lineup that's been established today. It's almost as strong as the Red Sox lineup. But really enjoy the day, be part of the dialogue, ask plenty of questions. And I just want to thank the Worcester Business Journal and all the speakers and all the participants who have taken time out of their schedule to really put together an outstanding event. I believe this is the 7th event. 3 years ago to the event, I was here talking about some of the emerging energy issues, and I'm excited to report there's a lot of stuff that's happening right here in the great city of Worcester, and Bill Jones from National Grid later on today will be here to describe a lot of it. So thank you for having us. Thank you for participating. Enjoy the breakfast and enjoy the speakers. Thank you all.
You know, Ed mentioned the Sox. I can't see everybody clearly. I don't have my glasses on, but I swear when I walked in, there was a guy right in the lobby who had a Mike Napoli beard. I thought it was Mike Napoli here this morning. I'd like to now bring up Ron Abarisk, who's the Senior Sales Manager for Hess Energy. Ron.
Thank you. Good morning. I did not wear a Red Sox logoed garment today, but I did wear the red tie. So happy Red Sox Wednesday to everybody. As Peter said, my name is Ron Abarisk. I'm the Senior Sales Manager of New England for the Hess Corporation, and it's a pleasure to be here again today as a corporate sponsor, a speaker, and an exhibitor for this, the 7th Annual Massachusetts Energy Summit, an event that we have proudly sponsored for many years. In addition, I'm also pleased to announce that we've once again taken this event 100% green by offsetting the energy that was used to power today's event with renewable energy certificates. And at this time, I think it's important. I'd like to also thank and recognize the Worcester Business Journal for putting this event on once again. I think it's a great opportunity for Massachusetts businesses to come here and hear from and meet with some of the more innovative and leaders in the energy space that we have in New England. So you definitely deserve a round of applause for the Worcester Business Journal. When I was reviewing the agenda before I got here today, there was one word that appeared several times in the agenda, and I think it's the reason why we're all here, and that was learn. And the old adage that knowledge is power is certainly not lost in the market energy space today. Learning more about the energy efficiency technologies that we have, sustainability through solar and wind innovations and developments, the evolving incentives that are offered by either state or federal agencies. There's a lot to learn about, and by using the power of the knowledge that you will learn here today from the speakers, the panel, and the exhibitors, you'll definitely serve yourself well. But don't let your learning end here today. I think we all know that in this day and age, information is right at our fingertips and more readily available than it ever has been in our history. So I urge you to take advantage of looking for facts and continue to increase your power of knowledge so that you can go on and make educated energy decisions for you and your company. I don't think it's been ever more essential than it is today. And the reason I say this is because many of you may know the dynamics of the energy market has changed greatly over the past several years. We have shale gas discoveries in the United States creating an abundance of natural gas with historically low commodity prices for gas. We have new technologies for the use of liquefied and condensed natural gas, making them truly viable options for companies to oil. And we also have seen record number of commercial and industrial companies switching from oil to natural gas. And at this time for New England, I think it's also even more important as a regional area with the increased natural gas pipeline constraints that we are dealing with, ISO New England's winter reliability program. All of these things and more are shaping the cost, the way we purchase, and the delivery and the use of our energy. So this is both an exciting and challenging reality of the energy market today. So continue to seek that knowledge so that you can go forward, be educated, look at your options, and make a decision that's going to work best for you and your company. Thank you for your time. I urge you to listen to the program that's presented today. It's going to be a very good program. Visit the exhibitors who have taken the time to come here and allow you to speak with them and learn more about their products. And of course, go Red Sox. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. So it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this morning. And I can see for those who are up at this podium, there's a cheat sheet right here. You don't have to look over. There's a little screen right here confirming that Richard Sullivan's picture is on the big screen. Richard Sullivan is the Secretary of Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. He oversees the Commonwealth's 6 environmental, natural resource, and energy regulatory agencies: the DEP, Public Utilities, Energy Resources, Conservation and Recreation, Agriculture, and Fish and Game. He also serves as the Chairman of the Mass Water Resources Authority and the Energy Facilities Siting Board and the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. Now, with all those agencies under his direction, what do you think the font size is on his business card? Maybe like a 6 or something? Probably pretty small. But anyways, ours is the first state in the nation to combine energy and environmental agencies under one cabinet secretary with the shared mission of bringing clean energy technology to market, curbing greenhouse gas emissions, and cutting energy costs. Secretary Sullivan's job is to carry out the nation's most ambitious energy efficiency program, a $2 billion investment over 3 years that aims to produce $6 billion in savings for consumers and businesses and support the continued growth of the clean energy sector in the state. Prior to his current cabinet appointment, Secretary Sullivan served as the Commissioner of the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and prior to that, as the Mayor of Westfield from 1994 to 2007. And it was interesting, we saw Richard was here at 7:30 sharp, and sometimes we've had keynote speakers at this event that made us hold our breath and cut it fairly close as they drove out from Boston. I said, geez, you're here on time and early. He says, well, I'm driving in from Westfield, so it's we're sort of a halfway point on his commute into Boston. So it's great to have him here this morning, and I'm very pleased to welcome Richard Sullivan. Richard.
Thank you for the kind introduction. It is great to be here today representing Governor Patrick and the Patrick administration, and there's no better way to start your day than in the heart of the Commonwealth in Worcester. Although I have to say, Ed, I thought there when you were saying, you all on your own time, I thought you were going to give us an invite to the seats at Fenway Park this evening. But since that did, and I got to be honest, I don't think National Grid is on the same trajectory as the Red Sox. While you may be going to the World Series this year, you did not have as bad a manager last year as the Red Sox. So it's close. And I did miss the memo to be able to dress casually. But let me just say, he had mentioned the sustainability hub that we helped open about a week ago here in the city of Worcester. And in so many ways, that is exactly the type of effort, the type of partnership involving National Grid, the educational institutions in the city of Worcester, the residents of the city of Worcester. It really all comes together and is exactly what the vision, I think, of what Governor Patrick intended to do when he merged the secretaries of environmental affairs and energy into the same secretariat. Because what he really wanted to have happen is he wanted to have a discussion about our energy, where our energy comes from, how we use it, the fact that we spend some $22 billion a year on energy in the Commonwealth, and about 80% of those dollars not only leave Massachusetts, but leave the country in many cases, and that it's really a lost economic opportunity. And to have the communities come together and have discussions at their kitchen tables in their homes, at their business tables, where they work, in our city halls, our town halls, and really to have those discussions about how we can use our energy more effectively and more efficiently. And the big vision was that when we made smart energy choices, that was going to be certainly wonderful environmental policy, following in the great works of Secretary DeVillers, who's here with us today, and the work that he did in the environment. And as I always say, we stand on the shoulders of the previous secretaries from the environmental secretaries to get us to this point. But it was really the vision of Governor Patrick to bring those conversations down to the very local level. And we are seeing the results of that. And those discussions can happen at the Sustainability Hub. And it's great that really the corporate model and guiding principles of National Grid match up so well with where we are in the Commonwealth in terms of investing in clean energies, investing in renewable energies, and making smarter choices. And we've seen the results. We've seen the results in the fact that we have begun to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Governor Patrick had challenged us to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by some 25% by the year 2020. That is beginning to happen. We are leading the nation. To invest in energy efficiencies, and we just recently, with the great work of our utilities and stakeholder groups, and Mark Sylvia from the Commissioner of the Department of Energy Resources have just recently put together the newest 3-year plans that's going to invest some $2 billion in energy efficiencies over the next 3 years to see $9 billion in benefits to the ratepayers. So we see that the investments are going to continue. So it is not just by chance, or as Governor Patrick says, it will not happen just by chance. We need to take actions to be leading the nation in energy efficiencies. And I just wanted to recognize Representative Beaton, who's here today, has been a great supporter of the work around energy efficiencies in the legislature, but he also lives it every single day in his own workplace. And I thank him for his leadership as well. And it was mentioned earlier, I think, by Ed, that in 2008, when the governor and the legislature passed the Green Communities Act, it really was at the heart to challenge us as a Commonwealth to think about that energy use. And that has been happening over the last few years and will continue into the future. So it isn't by accident that we are #1 in energy efficiencies. And what we've seen that this has in fact been very good environmental policy. What we've seen is that we are less reliant on fossil fuels, which are not native to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We are, in fact, at the end of those energy pipelines. We are investing instead in energy efficiencies and renewable energies. What we are seeing is that we are becoming more energy independent here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That's good for the short run, and it is certainly good for the long run. But make no mistake about it. While it is good energy policy and it is good environmental policy, at the end of the day, it's an economic development model for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that is working. The governor will talk about making investments in education, infrastructure, and innovation. Where better than right here in the city of Worcester with all of you very talented private business owners that get together and innovate the energy industry every single day, bringing better results for the future of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So that today we have some 5,500 companies doing business in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the field of clean energy. There's now 80,000 Massachusetts residents working in the field of clean energy in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts today. We've seen almost a 24% job growth in this sector over the last 2 years. And those 5,500 companies, not government bureaucrats, but those 5,500 companies are projecting that we will see the same type of growth this calendar year. So this has become a very vibrant part of the Massachusetts economy because it is based on what we do best in Massachusetts. We focus and invest in education, infrastructure, and innovation, and we have those great partnerships. Also in those great pieces of legislation back in 07 and 08, created the Clean Energy Center. And I did want to recognize one of our great board members, no stranger to Worcester, everyone out here, the president of Quinsigamond Community College, Gail Carberry is here. Mark Sylvia also serves on that board. The Clean Energy Center was established for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to grow the clean energy sector in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And we have done that as those numbers, as those job numbers, as those employment numbers, as those company numbers growth show. It is very focused and it works because it is absolutely right for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And we are going to expand that vision probably ever so slightly. We are looking to lead the nation in water innovation and water technology. That will become part and has become part of the mission of the Clean Energy Center. I recently, over the last week, was up in Canada visiting Nalcor and Hydro-Quebec and looking to find a way to be able to bring in larger scale hydro onto the grid in Massachusetts and certainly into the ISO region here in New England in dealing with issues of not only generation but certainly transmission. It is part of the nation-leading Global Warming Solution Act's carbon reduction plan. We need to bring large-scale hydro in. It is part of that plan. It is a significant part of that plan, and we are moving in that direction because the future is bright. As Governor Patrick says, if we get clean energy right, then the world will become our customer. And we are well on our way to achieve exactly that here in Massachusetts. Now, they've actually given me 30 minutes, which I don't think I've ever talked for 30 minutes in my life. I would much rather, as Ed had said, learn something here today. So I would much rather take your questions so that you know that we are going probably in the future. I think the story of how we got to where we got, the vision of Governor Patrick is very real, but it is well known. We are sitting here today, but we are looking to the future. And I can tell you, for anybody that has spent any time or worked with Governor Patrick, he is very cognizant of the fact that we have 14 months left in this administration in a large agenda, an aggressive agenda. As he says, we will finish strong. And we have put energy and environmental affairs in a position to finish very strong and to embed into the future the successes that we have grown here in the clean energy sector in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, because it is the right thing to do. It is our generational responsibility, both from a position of supplying jobs into the future, but also for our environment into the future, and so that we will continue to make those strategic investments in clean energy, because they are at the heart of what Governor Patrick believes in that we should be making strategic investments for the growth opportunities of the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We need to create opportunities economically across Massachusetts, and there is no sector that does that better than the sector of clean energy. The job growth and the investments have been across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. In fact, the largest job growth that I talked about earlier was actually in southeastern Massachusetts. So it just shows that these are jobs that are created locally. The benefits all inure locally. And with that, we are in fact leading the nation. And I can tell you, there's not a day that goes by that either my office or one of my commissioners isn't contacted by some other state saying, how do you do this right? I got a call the other day from the brand new, first ever Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs from the state of Oklahoma, who wanted to know how we were doing right. Now, I'm not telling you we're going to have the same energy policies as the state of Oklahoma, but it was interesting because he said, you seem to be the only state that's getting it right. And I think that that is, in fact, correct. It's correct because that's the vision that the governor has for the Commonwealth, but it makes sense from an environmental point of view. It makes sense from an economic point of view. And we have all of you here in this room because the talent that we have in education, in innovation, and in business is really something unique to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and that's where we need to be making the investments and where we will be doing that. So with that, I'm happy to take some questions or let you all get back on schedule, so whatever anybody would like. If you ask me anything too hard, I'll have Mark come up and answer.
Hi, John T. at Northeast Real Estate Solutions. We deal a lot with solar farms that investors are looking to make the investment in the solar farm, obviously for return on their investment.
Sure.
If there's one thing that really kind of scares people off, it's the volatility of the SREC market. Is there anything that we can do to try and bring some stability to that so that people can make a better financial projection?
Sure. And I think we have looked, and Mark and his team have spent an inordinate amount of time on exactly that question, because we've been very cognizant of a few things. Some states have kind of, in solar in particular, kind of bolted out of the gate and had a very successful program for a year or two, and then it's crashed. And we have obviously don't want to do that, as the governor has set a very aggressive goal for 2020 that we now need to have 1.6 gigawatts of solar installed by that 2020 time. Just for perspective, when he came into office, there was 3. So that growth has been enormous. But what we understand and we've learned, while it's important to have the conversations with the solar developers and the real estate owners, really at the end of the day, the heart of a successful program is going to be creating a program that the financial institutions, the lending institutions has comfort with. So there does in fact need to be stability. And so I don't know if you've seen the draft regs that are out there for SREC 2, but they do go out 10 years. It is on a declining scale, which we think is reflective of what the price points for solar are going to be as the costs of manufacturing and installation have come down significantly. Was just out yesterday actually at a Northeast utility, a solar array in Indian Orchard, which was originally designed as a 6 megawatt. Because the pricing came down, they actually built an 8 megawatt facility for exactly the same price that they had originally budgeted about a year and a half ago. So that's how fast the pricing's coming down. But there is stability in it. The financial institutions have made comment that they are supportive of that project. We knew back on SREC 1 that we needed to clear those SRECs, which we in fact did, so that anyone who was in SREC 1 was a stable program, and look to create that moving forward. But at the end of the day, while everybody's comments are important, we need to have the financial institutions be able to say we can loan on these projects, that we can finance these projects. And we'd also like to see, the smaller banks, the community banks across the Commonwealth have enough comfort level with the program where they could be doing that locally, because while we like to keep the jobs local in terms of installation and manufacturing where we can, and maintenance jobs, we'd also like to keep the financing dollars here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and turn those back into the local economy as well. So those final regs are coming out shortly. But the drafts are out there, I hope that we've hit that sweet spot. I believe we have with the financing institutions. Yeah.
Secretary Sullivan, Chris Newman from the Institute for Energy and Sustainability. I applaud your office and administration's efforts. And in my experience, I've found a similar story about the successes of Massachusetts. But I'm wondering what the challenges will be ahead, and what are we maybe not doing to the best of our ability, and what are the areas for improvement?
It's interesting. I think I'll go to two extremes, I think. One is, I think I will be very candid and tell you, I don't think that there's anybody from the government side of the house who ever thought we were going to be in a position where we were looking at an SREC 2 program probably during our administration. So the fact that we went through the solar projects and the caps 4 years early is a great problem to have, but is one that we have, again, kind of going back to the last question, been very cognizant of how do we keep the momentum going. So that's been one really good problem. On the flip side, I think it's pretty clear that we have struggled a bit with onshore wind, particularly around siting. We came close a few years ago to having a piece of legislation that would have actually passed but got hung up on a real technicality in the legislature, and have never been able to get back to have a hard legislation around wind siting onshore. And so we have been pretty clear that we have best practices in terms of zoning and bylaws and recommendations, but they're just that. So we've had to go back and rethink our siting issues, where it's appropriately sized and zoned, and working closely with communities on that. So I think we've been upfront about that, and a willingness to work with DEP, the Department of Public Health, and local boards, commissions, particularly health boards, around the siting issues, so that we can have communities feel comfortable that when they site wind. It's appropriately sited, and there are a lot of places that are appropriate to place it, but we need to have the conversations at the local level. So we've been pretty upfront on that. And really, if we're going to hit the governor's goals of 2,000 megawatts of wind by the year 2020, the vast majority of that, probably over 3/4 of that, is actually going to be offshore. I was down speaking at the AWEA conference yesterday in Providence, and Secretary Jewell, the Interior Secretary, was there, and she is going to be continuing to roll out the bidding process on the areas of offshore wind federally. And Massachusetts will not only be at the forefront since we have 2 of the larger offshore areas, but also I think Massachusetts itself has been well positioned because the governor has made the strategic investments in the Wind Test Blade Center in Charlestown, and also the really state-of-the-art, first of its kind terminal in New Bedford to be able to meet the needs of not just Cape Wind, but all of the offshore wind that's going to be developed off the east coast of the U.S. So again, just one more example of strategic investments in regional equity to be able to grow the jobs and the economies of New Bedford and greater New Bedford. Thanks. Yeah. Yep, and then I'll come over here. Nope.
Good morning, Mrs. Secretary. Working with a commercial bank that has financed probably a half dozen solar projects, has constructed its own system on one of our buildings, and has signed a number of power purchase agreements with some of our customers. I'm just having a little bit of trouble trying to reconcile the objective to create more stability within the program and looking at the preliminary guidelines that have been put forth under the SREX 2 market. And the reason I say that is, in terms of our underwriting process, by having different systems that generate SREX at a different schedule and different factor, and then having a declining scale, you'll have now a system that potentially cash flows in the early years, but may not cash flow in the later years. So again, given the objective to create more stability, there are enough moving parts to the program as we know, it seems to me as though there's a little bit of a disconnect in terms of the preliminary guidelines that have been put forth and the objective to create that more streamlined stability going forward.
I think 2 points. One is, we do have different factors we proposed different factors for different types of installations. So we absolutely are looking to provide greater incentive for brownfield redevelopment, rooftops, municipalities, residential, absolutely, and less of a subsidy, if you will, for large scale on the ground, taking farmlands or forest lands or open field lands and turning it into a solar farm. So less of a subsidy over there because, again, let me put on the other side of my hat, from the environmental point of view, that's really where we want to be going. Those are the sites that we want to have redeveloped or developed to better uses. With regards to the SREC itself, it is on a declining basis, although the first few years are held stable for what the developer would have gotten under SREC 1. So we understand there needs to kind of be a bridge. And at least as we've proposed it right now, we think that the subsidy in the out years is reflective of what the actual costs of those subsidies need to be, both now and in the out years, because the costs are coming down. So the flip side to your question is really now out in year 10, are we wildly over-subsidizing for when your costs really aren't there in the costs of production? So we are sensitive to it, and I'm not saying that anything is etched in stone. And as I said, we actually went out and sought comment. I don't know that we had your particular lending institution, but sought comment from the industry. And when they brought in all of their really smart people and looked at pricing and looking where the subsidy, and that's what it is, needs to be, that we were within that sweet spot. So I don't know that there's really any inconsistency with that. I think we're trying to reflect what's actually the reality out there in the marketplace, which is really what the lending institutions are telling us we need to reflect. Because, you certainly heard the other counter arguments out there that even in SREC 1, that we were providing too big of a subsidy for solar to get it to work, and that we're over-subsidizing solar for versus some other, perhaps given the price of natural gas, and there's actually a cost implication there. So, I will never stand here and say that we've actually got it, absolutely right. So we're certainly willing to look at comments, they are only draft at this point, although they will be final shortly. But we think we've tried to do that. The other part is clearly a public policy perspective that it's solar, but it's not necessarily solar everywhere. We do have places that we would like to see it more than others. Yeah.
Hi, Duncan Chapman. Yeah, Duncan Chapman with Northeast Real Estate Solutions. We are a commercial industrial brokerage consulting firm helping to locate sites for renewable energy projects. My question goes to some of the other renewable energy programs, particularly anaerobic digestion, and then also biomass. When states like Minnesota, Oregon, Washington State, California, and Maine can do biomass, and we seem to be stuck not doing that. But then obviously on the positive side, anaerobic digestion is absolutely coming online in 2014, so kudos to your group on that.
I'll take the compliment first. We obviously have made a large push for anaerobic digestion, and this is a perfect example of where having energy and environmental affairs in the same secretariat works real well. So we crafted new landfill regulations on the environmental side through DEP, so that your food waste will have to come out of your out of the waste stream, which is obviously one of the perfect candidates to be able to go into anaerobic digestion. We're also creating grant programs to help start the construction of obviously the anaerobic digestion facilities that need to be there on the other end in order for companies and institutions to be able to meet the new food waste regulations. So we are all in on that. We will work with particularly cities and towns, at their wastewater treatment facilities, which are big users of power. That's usually the number one cost for those facilities. Perfect location for those types of operations. MWRA, we just recently voted, I chair that board, we just recently voted to create a food digester at MWRA, and where possible to begin to use the MWRA as kind of a pilot test bed for other technologies. We got to get through a lot of legal hurdles and liability hurdles and insurance hurdles, but I think we can ultimately get there. So we are being very progressive on anaerobic digestion. And while we certainly have not necessarily encouraged biomass here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we did come out with what I think are national leading regulations that if companies can meet the environmental standards for the biomass, then it certainly is qualified for RECs and can move forward. But they are a high standard without a doubt. There may be some out there that think that may be the downside to have an environmental and energy into the same secretariat. I happen to be very comfortable with the position that we took on that, which is a significantly higher standard than the other states that you mentioned in terms of air quality and efficiencies in order to qualify, than they have. But without a doubt, I don't think we have any plans in the immediate future, at least no one submitted any plans to see biomass in Massachusetts. You got one more? Sure.
I believe the Mass Stretch Energy Code has been a great success, and I know is currently in the public vetting period. But I wanted to ask your opinion on where you think the future of the Stretch Energy Code or more aggressive building codes is going.
Did you get him to ask that question, Mark? He's my commissioner. I agree with you. Obviously, it was a key component of the Green Communities Act in terms of the stretch code, and I think it has had a great impact for the now 110 green communities to have used that. It also, by the way, is also one of the reasons why we score well by ACEEE when we get our energy efficiency national leading scores, because it is obviously more aggressive than some other states. Are we planning it, Mark, or have we already done the webinar? Okay, so if you want to give your name and anybody else in the room that would like to be part of that webinar, Department of Energy Resources is actually going to be doing a webinar with the proposed look at what the stretch code 2 in fact will be. I don't want to get all bureaucratic, but we ultimately aren't the ones at the state level that pass that, although we will be the ones that ultimately propose it. That board is actually over in public safety, which seems a little strange, but that's where the building codes are, which that does make sense. So we are working closely with our sister agency on that, but we will be going out here shortly on a proposal for comment with stakeholders. This isn't even draft regulations or a draft proposal. It's kind of pre-draft, but we're looking to engage all the stakeholders of what they think the stretch code 2 should look like. There is a requirement under the Green Communities Act that that has to be something higher than the standard base code. The good news is the standard base code has now actually caught up to what was the stretch code. So now all of a sudden that's not quite as aggressive as it looked originally when it was proposed. So we are working with that. We are very cognizant that there are a lot of stakeholders, from all walks of life, from residential and financial institutions and development institutions that may have a slightly different view and want to go slower than perhaps some of us in the energy efficiency worlds. So we're going to start that process and start it in earnest. And I would hope that we would be able to get to something, over the next, again, we've got 14 months left here, so that's kind of our time frame. Okay? So Mark Sylvia, it's his team that'll be doing that webinar. So if anybody wants to get that, or we can get you an email address and you can just give us notice, and we're happy to include you. Okay?
Terrific.
Great.
Let's give him a hand.
Okay.
Hold on just a second. Thank you, Secretary Sullivan. I have for the Secretary a beautiful picture book, Heart of the Commonwealth, and so we'd like you to remember your stop here in Worcester on the way into town, and thank you so much for coming, and you did fill the half hour very well, with a lot of substance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks.
You good?
Yeah, we're good.
All right.
Wow, we're off to a great start. Thank you so much. All right, so here's the drill. We're going straight into the first panel right now. After that first panel, which will last about 50 minutes, we'll then have a 10 to 15-minute break where everyone will be able to go out and visit exhibitors and network a little bit, and then we'll be back in here. So I'm going to introduce our moderator, David O'Connor, and we're going to ask all the panelists to come up while he's being introduced, and then David will introduce all of you once you're on stage. So, David O'Connor is the Senior Vice President for Energy and Clean Technology. You guys can come on up now. At ML Strategies, LLC, a subsidiary of the law firm Mintz Levin. David helps energy and technology companies shape and navigate emerging legislation, policies, and regulations in a way that will expand their markets and accelerate their growth. His clients include companies that deliver energy efficiency services, develop wind, solar, and biomass power plants, install transmissions and smart grid technologies, and bring new low-carbon fuels and offsets to the marketplace. Previously, he served as Commissioner of the Mass Division of Energy Resources from 1995 to 2007, and there he directed energy efficiency and renewable energy programs and helped develop the first ever multi-state agreement to cap and trade power plant carbon emissions. So obviously we could hear a speech from our moderator, but he won't do that because we have a terrific panel and he'll help us get the most out of them. David, thank you.
Thank you, Peter, very much. And I want to begin by just acknowledging the leadership of the Worcester Business Journal. This conference has begun to accumulate a really impressive history, and I think has, in many ways, advanced the clean energy revolution that's been going on in the Commonwealth, and I think plays a very important role at bringing, out for regard the remarkable sort of development of those initiatives here in central Massachusetts. And I think the journal gets tremendous credit. Peter Stanton and Chris Prosser and their team really do a great job bringing together a terrific audience as well as some great panelists. And so the first panel this morning is going to look at energy efficiency and new energy technologies And I think it makes some sense to begin there because in many ways, if I can use a sports metaphor, they seem to be in fashion this morning, energy efficiency is the blocking and tackling, really, of energy management. And I think if there's a theme that we want to convey in this panel, it really is that good energy management is good business. And I think as you hear the panelists today, you're going to get a sense of ways in which they are actually transforming the operating characteristics and strategies of businesses and institutions here in the greater Worcester area in ways that actually, in the end, really improve their bottom line profitability. So I'd like to invite you to listen for that in their presentations, and we're going to begin picking up where Secretary Sullivan left off with a presentation from an official with the Commonwealth at the Clean Energy Center to describe some of the programs that businesses are taking advantage of to achieve those good results. And then we're going to work through 3 examples of companies that are doing innovative things in this area that I think will provide some really interesting case studies for you about the kinds of things that may be useful to you as you work to increase your profitability. So let me begin by introducing our first speaker, Galen Nelson. Galen's the Director of Intergovernmental Partnerships at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. The Clean Energy Center is one of the new agencies created coming out of the Green Communities Act. The agency reports to Secretary Sullivan. They're an important part of his larger energy and environmental team. And Galen there is responsible for developing programs that reduce market barriers and create opportunities for emerging clean energy companies. Before that, he had some extensive experience in the city of Boston, so I think he knows what it's like to operate these programs, if you will, on the ground level in a city like Worcester and in the surrounding areas. So with that, I'd like to invite Galen to kick it off.
Great, thanks, David, and thank you to the Worcester Business Journal. This is a great event, and I think it's just a wonderful reminder that that the clean energy economy is not just strong in Boston, it's strong across the state, here in the Southeast, in Berkshire County, and all over the state, and that's really exciting to see, so I'm really happy to be here. I think I may have actually sent you a dated bio. I'm actually the Director of Market Development at the CEC, the Clean Energy Center, so focused very much on helping both established and emerging companies, clean energy companies here grow in the Commonwealth. I think I'll continue with the sports metaphor. I'm happy to say that I had this beard before the Red Sox made it popular a couple years ago, so I think I'm a little ahead of the Red Sox in that regard. So I'm just going to talk briefly about the Clean Energy Center. Secretary Sullivan did a great job of explaining our mission, which is very focused, and I don't think I need to provide too much more background, but I'm going to briefly talk about who we are, what we do, what our primary mission is, and then talk about businesses that are taking advantage of some of the programs that we have available today, and also talk about some of the emerging technologies that we see and that we're trying to support. So, as the Secretary noted, we were created by the Green Communities Act back in 2009. We have kind of 3 core divisions within the Clean Energy Center. We have a renewable energy division which supports the deployment of renewable energy technology, generally commercially viable renewable energy technologies such as wind and solar. We have an investments division that makes direct investments in clean energy companies. So a good example there, top of mind, Next Step Living, a Boston-based company that when I first met with them when I was with the city of Boston, they had 2 employees, and now they have well over 300 employees. Really exciting growth with that company that provides energy efficiency services to the residential sector. And then we have a division that's called Innovation and Industry Support, which is the division where I'm located. And in our division, we work very closely with, as I said, both emerging and established clean energy companies to help them grow. We help support the cutting edge research and deployment of emerging technologies that where they're seeking to enter new markets. we do a lot of international work, working with our partners in the state and in the international community, where Massachusetts companies are looking to do business overseas, and where international companies are looking to establish beachheads here in Massachusetts. We support clean energy incubators around the state, including several in this region. So these are co-working spaces where companies are growing, where they're deploying new technologies, and these spaces are critical to the health of our clean energy ecosystem here in the state. And finally, we support the commercialization, the acceleration of towards commercialization for emerging clean energy technologies. So Secretary Sullivan said that we are responsible for growing the clean energy industry, and so that is one of the most important ways in which we can help grow the industry, which is to help these emerging startup companies, early stage companies, identify demonstration sites, identify their first customer, link them with potential investors, link them with research and development institutions, academic institutions that can approve out their technologies, monitor and evaluate their technologies, provide third-party verification for their technologies. Those are the types of links that we make for these emerging companies. So part of our job is also looking around the corner, right, at what the next new emerging markets are and are looking like. So for example, right now we're very focused on district energy and microgrids, which plays to some of the great strengths here in the Commonwealth, both of our very strong clean energy industry, but also of our strong IT sector here in the state, and so many other sectors that are emerging. Secretary Sullivan talked about the strength of the industry here, the number of jobs, so I won't repeat what he said, but I will just say that the industry is growing and is growing strong at a very steady rate, and we're happy to have been a part of that growth. In fact, I will add one more stat to the list that he threw out. We actually identified over 15,500 clean energy jobs here in central Massachusetts. So I think that this is a fairly sophisticated group now, knowing that you've been doing this for several years. I don't think I need to talk too much about why energy efficiency and why renewable energy deployment is important or smart for the business community. So I won't focus too much on that, nor will I focus on energy efficiency programs, because I think that Commissioner Sylvia is going to focus on the wonderful energy efficiency programs that are partners in the utility community manage and do so very well, and that has helped us achieve our #1 rating energy efficiency. The Secretary noted the $2.7 billion in investments yielding $9 billion in savings for rate payers. Obviously, that's a great ROI from a business perspective. So I would urge all of you who haven't to explore the wonderful energy efficiency programs we have here in the state. And again, I think Commissioner Sylvia will talk more about that. I did want to talk about some of the programs that we offer specifically that could be of assistance to the business community. So at this point, solar is very well established. The costs, as you all know, have come down, particularly for large-scale solar, where third-party ownership is an option. We don't see a need to kind of step in and provide additional assistance in that regard. The market is competitive enough. Feasibility studies are no longer necessary. But there are emerging technologies where bringing down the cost, de-risking the deployment of these technologies can really be helpful. And that's, in fact, what we're doing with larger scale wind, with hydro, with anaerobic digestion, with solar thermal, and a couple of other technologies where we're actually helping to buy down or de-risk the cost of those investments by providing funding for feasibility studies. We're just beginning to do that now with district energy, and I think that's very exciting for us. When the Secretary talked about some of the challenges that we face, or as I like to think of them, some of the opportunities we have looking forward. I think one of our greatest opportunity, not just here in the Commonwealth, but across the nation, is to begin to deal with the inefficiencies at the grid level. There was a great statistic out of DOE the other day that the amount of heat that is lost from our grid nationally is roughly equivalent to the amount of energy consumed in Japan. Our grid's only about 33% efficient, and that's because the vast majority of our power plants send all of their waste heat into the atmosphere. And we can use our energy smarter. And there's a great opportunity, again, for Massachusetts that involves building infrastructure, creating good jobs, and using that heat more effectively with district energy systems. So I'm really excited that we're moving ahead with our partners at the Department of Energy Resources to explore this area, to begin to provide some funding to kickstart that market, and that's a really exciting opportunity for us. There are also some resilience benefits to that work, which I think are even more meaningful to us now, post-Sandy and the other severe storms that we and others in the region have experienced. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity for us to help jumpstart a new energy infrastructure that will provide multiple benefits, economic savings, resilience benefits, and carbon reduction benefits. I just wanted to, I had some logos there from businesses, and I'll just end my remarks now. Just by talking about these businesses here that have adopted cost-effective energy efficiency measures and or deployed renewable energy technology, in this case predominantly wind and solar. In particular, I'll just call your attention to the Light-A-Lear example, and I want you to note that there are both large and small businesses here, some that have deployed relatively modest 50 or so kW solar systems that have resulted in significant long-term savings for those businesses. And some of them are obviously larger companies that have deployed larger installations and also seen significant savings. The Light-A-Lear case study, I think, is particularly noteworthy. This is a company that, working very closely with National Grid, our partners in the utilities, implemented a number of energy efficiency measures that, and saw hundreds of thousands of dollars in annual savings. In fact, the energy efficiency measures that they implemented had a payback period of less than 9 months. They also, a couple years ago, installed the wind turbine that you see there in the background, excuse me, of the slide, a 2-megawatt wind turbine, an appropriately cited 2-megawatt wind turbine, and that's saving them nearly $500,000 in energy costs annually. And I think what's most interesting about this is not only is this saving this business money, significant sums of money on their energy expenses, but the CEO made a point of remarking when they installed the wind turbine that these energy savings in part help them keep jobs here in the States rather than shipping them overseas. So I think this is a great story about how energy efficiency, renewable energy can help businesses remain competitive, not just purely from a financial standpoint, but as carbon accounting and reporting becomes more aggressive up and down the supply chain. We want Massachusetts businesses to be on the leading edge and be deploying these technologies that will help them remain competitive. So we're happy to play a role in assisting businesses do that, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Galen, so much. Our next speaker is Rob Pratt. Rob is the chairman and CEO of Greener U, a company he founded to help colleges and universities become sustainability leaders while reducing their energy, water, infrastructure costs, and so forth. Rob and I have worked together for many years. I know him well, and he's a dear friend. He also was CEO of Energia Global International. He was a senior vice president at the Kendall Foundation, director of the Massachusetts Renewable Trust. You name it, Rob's done it. So with that, Rob, we'd be delighted to hear about Greener U.
Thanks very much, David. So I've been in the clean energy space for over 30 years, and I've been delighted to see the growth that's occurred. When I was director of the Mass Renewable Energy Trust, I said, we really ought to be doing a jobs search to see how many jobs are in the clean energy industry. And our first job report came out in 2004, and it showed 10,000 jobs in the clean energy sector. The second one was done in 2006, and we were up to 14.5. And the recent report with CEC just came out recently, and we are now up to 80,000 jobs. It's one of the fastest growing sectors, 25% per year. So this is a happening place, and energy efficiency is right at the forefront of what's helping Massachusetts grow in this important area. As David mentioned, we started Greener U because I wanted to work with a sector that I thought could be champions in carbon emission reduction, energy efficiency, really moving the ball forward. And so Greener U really exclusively focuses on colleges and universities, but a lot of what I will be saying today is directly relevant to those of you who are running your own businesses or organizations where you're consuming a good deal of energy. We basically get in, we do large-scale energy efficiency implementation with schools. We're working with WPI in a big project. We're also working with Clark, Assumption, Holy Cross in this area. We've grown to be the largest company, energy and sustainability company serving higher ed in New England. So we've really been on a fast track and are part of this growing clean energy sector in Massachusetts. In terms of the kind of things I'd just like to talk about today is just 4 basic points. First of all, in terms of really looking at ways in which you can reduce your energy costs and really get more efficient, the first thing that we really urge our colleges to do is undertake a comprehensive assessment of where you are. It's a lot more than just changing the lights. It's looking at your control and energy management systems, your variable speed drives, boilers and chillers, your HVAC systems, opportunities for fuel conversion. You've got to be looking at the overall piece, because the great thing about energy is that there's a revenue stream associated with the savings, and you can use that to help finance the program that really will be, in many cases, something that by bundling some of the longer term things like the chillers and so forth that you know you have to replace, but it's really not a great payback. You can bundle an overall program that a comprehensive energy assessment will reveal, such that over, say, a 3 or 4 or 5 year program, you can not only reduce your energy costs, you can really address your deferred maintenance and come up with an affordable program taking advantage of the kind of utility incentives that National Grid and NSTAR and so forth are offering, that really presents a good opportunity for you. But the real focus here is looking at it comprehensively. The second thing is, let me talk a little bit about something we're doing a lot with our colleges, and that's retrocommissioning. Let me just get a show of hands here. How many routinely take your car in for tune-ups for, say, 15, 30,000 miles? How many are taking your cars on a regular basis? Okay, now let me ask the second question. How many of you are regularly doing tune-ups for the buildings and facilities in your overall companies and organizations? Hands up. Say every 5 years or so. And how many are doing continuous commissioning, ongoing commissioning, where you really see what's going on? So you can see there's big opportunities here, because you tune up your cars, and yet your buildings in your companies and so forth are using far more energy. So basically, through a retrocommissioning approach, you're essentially doing building tune-ups. And the great thing about building tune-ups of this kind through retrocommissioning is that you find out a lot of things that aren't working. What we find in working with many of the colleges is that people have turned off the energy-saving devices. In many cases, the facility staff, because they don't really understand how they work and so forth, just say, you know, I don't really know how this works. They turn them off. You'd be amazed at how many of these systems are not in operation. So what we do in retrocommissioning, we go in, we look at the overall facilities, where there's opportunities and so forth. The paybacks are excellent. And it is really the next step after the comprehensive look that really pays off, and you can get immediate savings from many of these areas with low-cost measures and so forth. In one great example, one of the major colleges here, and I won't indicate which one, but we worked in a LEED science center that was only 6 or 7 years old, and we found, and they said, don't go in there, it's really fine. We said, well, you know, we really should take a look. We did a retrocommissioning approach. We saved 20% in overall energy, and it was only 6 years old. And again, there was a whole series of things that we'll be able to find, and that I would guess is true in many of your facilities. The third area I'll mention is just the operational focus. You know, it all comes down to people. And from the standpoint of consumption of energy and so forth, you really have to work with your facility staff. You really have to focus on where you're spending your greatest amounts on energy and so forth. Training of your facility staff, we often work with our schools in terms of finding ways to train the staff and give them recognition. You know, very often through incentives or recognition to your facility staffs, that can be one of the most cost-effective dollars that you spend. Because many facility staff are not fully trained, and so a really good thing to do. And you also can look at your overall operations. Are there areas where you could be using your buildings differently? Are there things that you could be doing in the short term behaviorally that really can change your energy consumption? And we find a lot of opportunities, so we always have a behavioral component to what we do when we're doing the mechanical and equipment installations as well. And finally, I'll just refer to the engagement and change strategy. So you've done your comprehensive assessment, you found out through your retrocommissioning where the opportunities are, you focused on the operations, now it's a matter of making things happen. In many cases, people are kind of overwhelmed. You know, they've got a lot to do. We're working with one college that has over $300 million in deferred maintenance. And what we've done is break it down. We're doing a $20 million program with that college, broken up into 4 $5 million modules. And it's not a $20 million program. Through energy savings, through utility incentives, through the savings that we're able to generate and so forth, we've been able to break that down. So the $20 million program is really only going to cost them $11 or $12 million out of pocket. And they do it through a 4-year program, so it becomes manageable. And that's where you can think about a big program that you can do with your company or in your institution. You can figure out how to break it up in a multi-year program where it becomes very affordable. And by doing that, you're going to be coming out in the back end, having saved a lot of money and reducing carbon emissions and really feeling good about what you've done. So, so I'm glad to be here with you today. I look forward to your questions, and go Sox.
Thank you, Rob. Really appreciate it. We're beginning to get some very tangible examples here of the blocking and tackling that I talked about. I want to turn next to Rick Galipo. He's the Vice President and General Manager for Energy Efficiency at World Energy, one of the sponsors, by the way, of today's conference. We're very happy to have him and appreciate the support of his company. And he leads World Energy's strategy with assisting customers to manage and reduce energy costs and consumption. So he's really the private sector, if you will, analog to what Rob's talking about here with colleges and universities. Prior to World Energy, Rick worked for many years with Northeast Utilities. He also founded Northeast Energy Solutions, so he's got a lot of experience in this space. Rick, tell us about the work that World Energy is doing.
Excellent. Thank you. Wow. Thank you. In keeping the sports theme, I've had a couple people in the past tell me that I resemble Kevin Youkilis, which is kind of interesting and kind of sad because whenever he comes on TV, my 83-year-old mother says she feels very sorry for him because he's so ugly. So I'm not quite sure what that means. But anyway, that's my sports theme question or comment. I struggled a little bit about exactly what I was going to say at this at my 5 minutes here, and I decided to take more the approach of a little bit of a high level and keep it a little more generic. And certainly we'll be happy to entertain questions as we move on. And we're also out there. There's several great exhibitors out there that would be happy to talk to you. You know, we have a booth out there also. The first bullet item that I have, the first time I saw this formula, I said, okay, like duh, that's pretty basic. But you know, energy, the cost of energy is simply the price times the quantity minus the incentive. Pretty simple. But that's the key to efficiency. That's what we need to address. So it's not just a matter of doing procurement or doing some efficiency, but it's comprehensive. As Rob said, you're going to hear the same theme in my talk here. So you really need to look at the price that you're paying for energy. If you really need to shop around, speak with suppliers, speak with brokers, find out what can you buy your electricity and your natural gas for? What works best for you? And then it's the quantity that you buy. That's where the efficiency comes in, or the renewable energy comes in. How can you cut that? How can you use less energy? And then the minus I is the incentive. There are a tremendous amount of incentives available out there. I'll hit on a few of them, but you're going to hear that a little bit later on. I'll stay brief, but you'll hear more about that. But this formula is key when you're considering implementing energy efficiency and just your energy costs in general. Digging deeper, I don't know, sure if you've heard that, but that's been a common theme, especially in energy efficiency for a few years now. And I have been here lighting as a thing of the past. That doesn't mean that there's no lighting opportunities out there. I've been doing this for, I don't know, over 25 years now, and I've probably been out to several facilities 5, 6 times and changed out their lights. The technology is constantly changing, it's constantly evolving. So, and today, it's still tremendous opportunities. I mean, we have a display, we have a fixture on our, at our booth, if you swing by during one of the breaks, where we just did a job where we took out 400-watt metal halides and put in this 39-watt LED. And we maintain the light output. It's just unbelievable. So the technology has really changed a lot. We have some induction lights out there. You see an exhibit with some induction lights, another great technology. So the technology is there. LEDs evolving daily. I mean, daily the fixtures are coming out, they're becoming more efficient, they're becoming less expensive. So lighting is still there. But what I mean by it's a thing of the past is you can no longer do lighting only. And it goes to what Rob was saying. You have to take a comprehensive approach to this. So what happens if you do lighting only, you got a great job, it's a 1.5, 2 year payback, so it's an easy sell through your facility. But then a year down the road, 2 years down the road, when you want to do your HVAC, your building controls, other things that have a slightly longer payback, it's harder to justify. So you really need to look at your entire facility, take a comprehensive approach to it, look at all measures, look at your lighting, look at, don't wait for your HVAC units to fail. Early replacement. The efficiencies have changed so much on that. Look at conversion from oil to natural gas. There's a lot of high efficiency boilers out there and furnaces out there. So look at all your options and then see what works best, package it all together and then implement it as a larger project rather than cherry picking and doing just the lighting or some of the easier measures. And then my third bullet item is develop a solid relationship with an ESCO, an energy services company. World Energy is one. There's a few companies out here. There's a lot of them out there. It's important. I'm sure that as customers, you're constantly getting bombarded by people calling you and knocking on the door. They want to do an energy audit. Take advantage of some of those, but shop around. Do some interviewing. Talk to some companies. Ask some of your competitors and some of your fellow business owners, and ask them who they've used and what the experiences have been, and build that relationship. Find somebody that can do comprehensive work that is credible, and that you feel comfortable with, and then form a team within the company of key people that know the facility, that know the financial aspect, the facilities aspect, that can come together and make them part of that team with the ESCO, and then develop a plan from there. Don't just let somebody come in and do an audit and come back and say, hey, this is what you should do. Form that team, tell them what your goals are, and then adjust as you move on. But absolutely take a look at that comprehensive approach, and don't be talked into doing a lighting only project at this point in time. Really look at all your opportunities. What's my last slide? My last point. My last point is incentives that are out there. Before I even start that, with the incentives, our company, we work in all of New England and New York. We do projects throughout there. And Massachusetts has by far the best programs, and I'm not just saying that because of where I'm at right now, but by far, and I actually worked for Northeast Utilities. I worked at Connecticut Light and Power for 21 years, and I helped develop most of the commercial industrial programs there. So kind of what I'm saying is I did a bad job when looking at Massachusetts. But the programs are excellent. The incentive levels are phenomenal. There's a lot of financing options there with the utilities. They're just really good, and the people that implement the programs, that administer the program, the engineers and the program managers are great to work with, and they're constantly quick to turn things around and help us out. Just a phone call away. So they're helping us help you. So there's a lot to be said for that. We don't have that same kind of cooperation and program level in other states. But again, take advantage of the incentives that are out there. And the key to that is working with a good ESCO, because a good ESCO knows how to access the utility money, the state money, the federal money, the grants that are out there. There's incentives that are available, again, through the utilities, through the state, through suppliers. You have some electrical suppliers that are willing, that have a financial arm, that are willing to finance any kind of energy conservation program. So there's monies available, so you can actually do projects with a positive or neutral cash flow, so there's no money out of pocket. Some of the incentives can be as high, you know, some of the small business programs in Massachusetts are 70, 80% incentive. There's 0% financing available in some cases. Not all cases, but that's how good it can be. So, you know, take advantage of that, look around and speak to the ESCOs that are out there and find somebody that you can work with and maximize those opportunities. That's all I have.
Good, Rick. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I think that starts to get very close to the action here. Let me invite Jim McCarthy to speak next. He's the Chief Operating Officer for R.H. White Companies. R.H. White is headquartered in Auburn, so not far from here. Many of you may well be familiar with it. And they provide a whole set of construction and comprehensive service solutions for utility, industrial, and commercial customers. Jim is responsible for all the departments and operating divisions, including building, utility construction, mechanical, and energy services. And we've invited Jim to talk a little bit today about sort of analog to the energy efficiency arena, which really has to do with other technologies that might allow you to take advantage of some of the low costs of natural gas right now. So with that, Jim, help us out.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here this morning. The company has a great emphasis on safety. So before I begin, I've got to stick with the sports analogy. One of our main focus items this year has been safety and fighting complacency. We're in a very risky business. We have to fight complacency. It's easy to get complacent with work methods and forgetting what you're going to do. And I had to use myself as an example at a safety meeting this week because after the Patriots game on Sunday, I was pretty distracted. I don't know how many of you are Patriots fans, but I was distracted, much like some of our workers get when they come to work in the morning. And the game was over, I had to trim my beard. So I went to get my trimmer, didn't check to see if the guard was on the trimmer, and began to shave away. I had a much fuller goatee before I came today. So hopefully the Red Sox do much better on tonight. Thanks for the introduction on R.H. White. I'm proud to say that we are celebrating our 90th anniversary this year as a private, family-owned, third-generation leadership business. And in today's economic climate, I think that's pretty remarkable. We really do strive to simplify infrastructure and construction and service solutions for our customers. And as David mentioned, we're in the markets of energy, water, wastewater, clean tech, campus environments, and with over 500 people, you can imagine why we take such a focus on both safety and quality. We've had decades of experience in gas distribution pipeline business and bulk propane systems, and now involved in this emergence of the virtual pipeline. So what has changed in the natural gas market? I think everybody's heard about the shale gas. Shale gas production is actually having a increased supply, lower cost. And the cost of natural gas is now significantly less than fuel oil, and businesses and industry are looking for options. We're lucky here in central Massachusetts to have gas pipelines, but there's a lot of demand being targeted at getting natural gas to industry and business who are off pipeline. This includes the expansion of both gas pipeline systems as well as delivery of off-pipeline options. So hence the virtual pipeline. So now companies have more fueling options that they didn't have before, and it's happened rather quickly in some arenas. A little over a year ago, some of these options were on the drawing board, but not real. How do you get this low-cost gas to customers off-grid? And liquid natural gas and compressed natural gas now have been trucked to customer sites, much like the propane distribution system of the past. So compressed natural gas and liquid natural gas are now delivery systems for delivering fuel to customers. And just a few moments about the basics. A couple of pictures up there. The one on the left, compressed natural gas, typically filled at very high pressure, 3,000 to 4,000 psi, into tube trailers at a compression site. The tube trailers are delivered over the road to a customer site. They are decoupled and connected to a decompression station and regulator station to pipe that gas directly into the building. Once the tube trailer is close to being exhausted because it's monitored electronically, another tube trailer is delivered, parked next to it, decoupled, and reconnected, thus providing an industry the ability to have natural gas fuel their boilers. It does have a lower on-site storage capacity because it is compressed natural gas. On the other hand, liquid natural gas, as shown on the right, is actually stored in liquid form at a customer site. As they use the gas, a tanker truck over the road comes and refills it just like a fuel oil. The difference between liquid natural gas and compressed natural gas is obviously liquid, but the liquid natural gas is stored at a very low temperature and a very low pressure. So it's almost at atmospheric pressure. And there are also temporary installs of this method available. So there are different models. Sometimes the suppliers will provide the infrastructure. That would lead to a longer-term contract in many cases. Other times the customer provides the infrastructure, and then they have the options to shop the molecule price. There are temporary and permanent installations both available. So the benefits are real. There's a significant dollar savings. There's a large difference in price right now between natural gas and fuel oil. There's the emissions benefit, cleaner burning fuel, lower CO2, SO2, and particulates. There's huge benefits. And a project that we just completed up in central Vermont for Omia Incorporated. There's actually a mining operation in central Vermont that I didn't know, and they take marble out of the ground and create calcium carbonate and truck it all over the world, all over the country, excuse me. They installed 8 15,000-gallon liquid natural gas tanks and vaporizers to replace their fuel oil system up there, and they're expected to save 40% of their total energy cost. They're one of the state's largest energy users. Out at UMass, the first in the state to install a temporary liquid natural gas facility. Several industries right now in areas of Massachusetts are getting delivered tube trailers to be a primary or a secondary source or a backup source for their fuel oil. So they're actually cutting their fuel oil usage and replacing it with lower cost natural gas. So my third bullet there is, why is there confusion in the marketplace? Facilities managers are trying to make decisions on how to lower their costs. The good news is there's more options. Bad news is there's a lot more options. How do you price it? How do you evaluate it? Relatively speaking, these are new technologies. A little over a year ago, tube trailers weren't available in New England. Those facilities weren't in place, and now there are 3 of them. There are pricing options and new infrastructure requirements. And how do you package that and price it properly to make sure what your ROI period is going to be? So we're in the early stages of market development. It's going to take a little while for it to shake out and determine where we actually end up. But there are industries that are absolutely making a positive impact on their bottom line and getting 1 to 3 year ROIs to augment their fuel system and replace it with a cleaner burning fuel and shut off the fuel oil tanks. So, in summary, it's here.
Terrific. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. By the way, Peter Stanton has graciously allowed our panel to go on 10 minutes beyond our scheduled end time, so we'll go to 9:50, which leaves time and opportunity for you to ask some questions. And I'd love to get some questions from you about particular ways in which you're trying to take these suggestions and strategies and put them into practice. You've got a great opportunity here with a terrific set of experts. Let me begin with sort of the question here. Let's say that I am a medium-sized commercial customer and I'm using oil for my heating and maybe even for process purposes. Do I change fuels first? Do I do energy efficiency first? What's the right way to think about making a change when natural gas prices have fallen a lot, so there's potentially savings there, but I may have very old, inefficient facilities, and I could have big savings there too. What's the strategy if I'm that kind of customer? Jim, you want to begin?
Well, they could call me, and, oh, no. I think that's where part of the confusion in the marketplace is, trying to decide which way to go and where the impacts are. And depending on the staff that's available to actually make those evaluations, I think sometimes it becomes a two-prong approach. And somebody has to make that investment of time to come in and call in somebody who can simplify that option. What is this actually going to return me? And I think it is a two-pronged approach, both from our standpoint, how do I immediately reduce my fuel cost? And at the same time, on a parallel path, how am I going to make my systems more efficient so that I'm not throwing that away as well?
Yeah, Rick, how about, what does World Energy do with a customer like that? How can you help them?
Yeah, I think you'll hear a lot of my answers start with it depends. It really depends on what the usage really is. Like a medium-sized customer, the fuel usage is probably not going to be that great. So a fuel conversion is fairly costly. So, it's something that you really need to look at and evaluate. Put a little bit of engineering into it, and there's a lot of financial, look at to really determine what's best. A fuel conversion is expensive, and putting in all new equipment, so that's probably a much higher payback project scope. So I would think that in an application like that, you wouldn't be just running in there first and doing a fuel conversion, switching over to natural gas. It's probably looking at all potential measures, and hopefully being able to identify other measures that you can apply to this, which is the whole comprehensive approach. So maybe if you take that with lighting, and maybe there's some refrigeration opportunities or some building control opportunities, which those three happen to be some of the best paybacks. They're year and a half, 2-year paybacks, and you put that with a conversion to a natural gas, then all of a sudden you have an attractive, attractive project. So it really is not just going in and trying to tackle one thing, but sitting back, looking at it, putting a plan together, and then looking at it as a comprehensive approach.
Rob, you must have colleges and universities stuck in that place. What do you do?
We've done many conversions, particularly, they have outlying buildings or so forth, boilers that can be converted. So we do a lot of conversions, but it is, as Rick indicated, part of, in most cases, a comprehensive plan. We're also working with colleges that have very large facilities, oil burning facilities. Number 6 facilities are trying to get over to natural gas, and that is part of a big plan because in many cases, you're talking about a $20 million installation. So many schools are looking at it, but there are many short-term opportunities, but again, it's all part of that comprehensive plan that can bundle things together where you've got the paybacks from lighting and controls together with conversions, and it can be a very attractive outcome.
Galen?
Well, I think you lead with energy efficiency. I mean, you want to reduce your consumption regardless of the fuel you're using. If you've got access to natural gas and you've got a facility that has significant thermal loads, maybe it's a food processing facility, maybe it's a brewery, a laundromat, a car wash, you might want to look at combined heat and power, which we haven't talked about yet, and for which the state has also been very good, working closely with our utility partners to incentivize CHP, and something that can help businesses reduce their costs while also improving efficiency and reducing emissions. So you might also want to look at, if you're in an area without natural gas, look at pellet boilers, commercial pellet boilers, which are coming down in cost, which we're also providing incentives for in the public sector, and are seeing increased adoption across the marketplace.
Terrific. How about from the audience here? Questions? Before you start your question, look for a microphone. We've got microphones coming around. Yes, down here. Thank you, Chris.
I'd like to
just do us a favor, introduce yourself. So.
Yeah, my name is Chris Davis, and I had mentored 2 startups through the Clean Tech Open National Organization competition, which just ended last week. And I'd like to follow up a little bit on what Galen talked about. From my experience, there's a lot of innovation going on here in the New England area, particularly in Massachusetts, around energy efficiency solutions that are based on software. And of the two companies that I mentored, young kids, 30-ish and younger, there was a high level of frustration in them getting access to customers and to energy services companies, for example, to help understand what are the challenges customers in these companies are facing and to help them build out their, for example, software-only platforms. So my ask of this group is if you get a call from one of these companies, they're bootstrapped, they're trying to raise funds, trying to develop their platforms, be open-minded, open your doors, and talk to them, because one company in particular that I was involved with, they just couldn't get access, and they had a great solution for optimizing airflow in commercial office buildings. Very low cost, software only, and solution scaled. So that's my ask of the group, no question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the comment. Questions? Yes, we have one here. Chris? Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Tracy West, and I'm from the Barton Center for Diabetes Education here in North Oxford, Mass. And my question is, a lot of the incentive programs that seem to be out there are for the small to large companies with credit incentives. What is available for the nonprofit sector? We would like to reduce our carbon footprint. We would like to save energy. I mean, our energy bills are our largest, the bulk of what we pay out, and we would really like to reduce that. What's available?
Galen, you want to begin?
Well, certainly the existing energy efficiency programs are open to all ratepayers, and those are great incentives for institutions of all sizes, from the smallest business, sole proprietor, which is served by the direct install program, to the larger institutions that would be a fit for the utilities' custom incentive programs. On our side, I know that many of our incentive programs to help deploy renewable energy technologies such as solar thermal, those feasibility studies are certainly open to the nonprofit sector. So I think there are a wide range of opportunities. I think with regard to financing, the heat loan is available. I don't know, Mark may talk a bit more about that, but there are also financing opportunities. We've just entered into a unique partnership with Wind Development and LISC and other partners to help bring energy efficiency and all the benefits of ESCOs to affordable housing by providing credit support to that effort. So that's an area in which we're innovating with regard to finance to expand the marketplace there. So I think there are a number of opportunities, and I think that anyone on our staff, and I will speak for Mark, anyone on his staff would be happy to talk to you about the options that are out there for the nonprofit sector.
I'll just add that there is a sort of one-stop shopping sort of a structure available for anyone who wants to take advantage of utility-sponsored efficiency programs, and that is masssave.com. So you want to contact them for sort of an initial point of entry to figure out what your options are and get good information. Yes, Rick?
Yeah, I don't believe that being a nonprofit has anything to do with it or what the facility usage is. It's about your meter. So I assume that you have a commercial meter for your facility. So being a commercial meter, you qualify for the C&I for the commercial industrial programs. So if it's a nonprofit, I mean, I'm just guessing at what you do. It sounds like it would be a small commercial industrial business. So you qualify for the small business incentives, which are very good, and there's financing options there too. So the fact that you're a nonprofit doesn't really matter. And if you happen to be so small that you're operating out of a small business and maybe it's a residential meter, there's some very good residential programs also available. So you're absolutely not excluded from the incentive programs, and we could talk more about it during the break.
Question? Down here in the front, Chris. Please introduce yourself.
Hello. Mike Ahern from Worcester Polytechnic Institute. I was thinking, Rob and Rick, you have a great deal of experience in saving energy, and there's many people here that are here because they're interested in saving. I was just curious if each of you could just say, what's the biggest surprise to you? What was the best thing to do, or the single most surprising measure that you took? Thank you.
I think the most surprising thing is just how long it takes to get people to do what is really makes sense. You know, I mean, decision makers, even those that you know, are looking at really attractive opportunities. In our experience with colleges, you know, you have a long budget cycle, and so even when you come up with great solutions with comprehensive, attractive paybacks and so forth, it just takes a while to get through that budget cycle. And but you know, what we're finding, however, is colleges really are very good in terms of looking a little longer term, because you own your buildings, you got students who are really pushing for greenhouse gas emissions, they're looking to make the college greener, so it just takes longer, but colleges tend to step up more than I think most commercial and industrial players, but it's just a longer cycle that's kind of unique, I think, to the higher ed community.
Rick, you want to?
Yeah, a couple different answers to that. One is, I completely agree. I think the thing that surprises me the most in this industry is how some things are just not implemented. And I'll give an extreme example. I've worked with some programs that are 100% incentive. The utility's paying 100% and the customers say no. So that it's like the Aflac duck. You just walk away. I don't know what to say. But the other thing is just the technology is changing daily. I mean, I mentioned lighting, the LED technology. I mean, I'll go out and I'll have a new email of some fixture that's 1 watt and produces, you know, all kinds of lumens. It's just amazing. But I guess the big surprise is the gas technology. It's fairly recent that the gas utilities have been offering incentives, or at least substantial incentives. It was always very minimal. Now there's substantial incentives, and the gas technologies, the furnaces, the controls have really improved a lot. So I think that's a big surprise, is how much we can incorporate gas measures into our comprehensive projects.
Well, I want to thank the panel and thank all of you for your attention. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. All right, it's time for a break. Please visit the exhibitor booths out in the lobby, get refreshments, and come back for the second panel. Thank you.
It is my pleasure I will introduce the moderator, and John DeVillers, who's our moderator, will introduce the rest of the panel, and we'll go from there. John DeVillers is currently the managing partner of Blue Wave Capital, a renewable energy development company that does business in New England, in South Africa, and in the Caribbean. And during his career, John has held several high-level government posts, including the Massachusetts Secretary of Environmental Affairs. And I know Secretary Sullivan mentioned and recognized John in the audience for his previous leadership in that post. He's been chair of the Mass Water Resources Authority and New England administrator for the EPA. He's on the board of directors of several nonprofit environmental groups, as well as the for-profit Clean Harbors and Next Step Living, which got mentioned earlier. He is a committed environmentalist and has received numerous awards and recognitions, including the Nature Conservancy's annual President's Award for National Leadership in Environmental Affairs. With his busy travel schedule, John has often been out of town for this event, but we've benefited from we valued his input and ideas for the program for several years now. So thank you, John, and we're thrilled to have you here as moderator of our second panel, John DeVillers.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter. We have an all-star cast to talk about policy. I have to confess that I'm from Buffalo, New York, and so I'm a diehard Bills fan, and we do our best to avoid sports analogies in this kind of a setting and most others. But we've got three great panelists, each of whom will speak for 5 or 8 minutes about a specific area of policy, and then we're going to open it up to all of you for questions. It's a really dynamic time in the policy world, and Blue Wave, the perspective I bring to it is in part as a former policymaker, but also now as a developer. We have about 60 megawatts of projects under development here in Massachusetts, 40 megawatts of which qualified in the SREC 1 program. And As other speakers, Rob Pratt talked about how long it takes. I guess that would be the biggest surprise to me in this industry, is how long and how tough it is to get these projects done. And one of the things that makes it especially challenging is that it's a very dynamic and fluid policy landscape that we're working in. The Green Communities Act set out a great framework for all the good things that you've heard about today and we'll hear about later. That was the easy part in many ways, and implementing the law and developing the regulations and policies is a challenge that the Commonwealth has met with distinction, I think. Everyone would agree with that, and one of our speakers, Mark Sylvia, has a heck of a lot to do with that. But he and others, I think, engaged in the game would admit there's still a lot of challenges left to address. Rick Sullivan touched on some of them earlier, but we've had great success, but that's created challenges that weren't envisioned even a year or 2 years ago. One of those challenges is, Rick touched on this as well, to avoid the boom and bust cycle that affected New Jersey, and I'm speaking more in the solar context, and we'll cover other policy areas as well. But New Jersey was the hottest market in the country. SRECs got overvalued, the market crashed. Basically, the economic development activity and energy savings that were a function of that program stopped dead for about a year and a half. So one challenge here is we've got a very hot market. It's been great, but how do we avoid overheating that market, having a crash, having this boom and bust cycle that affects jobs and other critical objectives that we have. One of the challenges that the industry faces, and the administration in particular, is justifying the cost of solar and other renewable energy, the cost to the ratepayers. At the same time, the administration's pushing appropriately to get off of farmland, out of forests, put these smaller systems on site, distributed generation in its truest sense of the use of the energy on site. That drives smaller systems, but smaller systems cost a lot more to construct than the larger systems. So that's an inherent policy conflict that the administration and others are trying to find the right balance to. The SREC program that many of you are familiar with, and as Rick said, those 3 years ahead of schedule to fill the 400 and really expanded to about 650 megawatts of SREC 1 qualified projects. There's a huge pipeline for the next SREC program, but there's also a cap on what can be net metered. For public projects, it's been met in this service territory, in grid service territory. It's close to being met in NSTAR, and on the private side in grid, it's 2/3 or more full. So there's that desire to enhance solar to meet the governor's 1,600 megawatt objective, but there's a legislative action that's going to be required to enable that. So those are some of the policy challenges. Someone mentioned earlier today keeping capital in the region. Most of these large projects are financed by Wells Fargo and JP Morgan and Duke Energy, large US utilities and European utilities. Using more at-home capital to return profits to the shareholders in those financial institutions and recycle it in this economy is yet another policy challenge that we face. So we want to try and touch on some of those and dive more deeply on ones that you were particularly interested in. Mark Sylvia, as mentioned, is the commissioner of DOER. He has the perfect background for doing that. He was the town manager in Plymouth. He understands what it takes to green a community. He directed the Green Communities program, the 110 or so communities, including Worcester, that are now part of that. That was a blank sheet of paper when Mark Sylvia took over that program. And he's now not just an architect of some of these programs, but really the chief executive officer for the Commonwealth's energy efficiency and renewable energy agenda. David O'Connor, who you met earlier, is Vice President, Senior Vice President for Policy and Legislative Affairs at Mintz-Levin, focused on the clean energy and energy world more broadly, providing strategic counsel, very good strategic counsel to companies that have an agenda on Beacon Hill or otherwise in a regulatory and policy context. He was the Commissioner of Energy Resources for the Commonwealth for a dozen years and brings that knowledge and experience to bear, and has a special interest and focus on enabling new technologies, enabling renewable energy to be incented to provide other benefits around heating and power and cooling, and he'll speak specifically to that. And then Tim Rowan, who I think is a hardy perennial at these events and has had a number of positions at National Grid that position him well for being the head of policy and legislative activities, really regulatory development, the next generation of policies and activities that the Commonwealth should pursue, and how National Grid can most effectively support and advance those broader social objectives. So he'll speak some to that. He also has a nuts and bolts perspective on this of what if you're running a company and you want to go through this, any of these processes from a utilities perspective, some of the things that they would want you to be thinking about and be prepared to address. So we'll try to cover in 40 minutes or so as much of that as we can. We'll start with Mark Sylvia, who present a general overview of the challenges he's facing.
Thank you very much. It's on? There we go. Hello. Thank you very much, John. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Particularly appreciate the opportunity to share the stage with these two gentlemen. As the Secretary mentioned in his keynote, our success is in part because of the policies that are in place, but also because of the partnerships that have been established. And so that becomes a reoccurring theme in all that we do to make Massachusetts a national leader on clean energy. And it's appropriate, I think, that I'm following the Secretary's keynote, because I think he laid out a very clear vision for all of you in terms of where Massachusetts is and where Massachusetts strives to be from a clean energy perspective. And so what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about, drill down a little bit more on what the Secretary shared with you in terms of a vision, and then I'm really looking forward to the questions you may have. So DOER, the agency that I'm associated with, we're the State Energy Policy and Energy Program Office. And so we're responsible, certainly working with our partners at the Clean Energy Center and the DPU, with developing the right policies that are consistent with the governor's overall clean energy agenda. And we're divided into four divisions. There's the Energy Markets Division, the Renewables Division, the Efficiency Division, and the Green Communities Division. And I mention that because I want to frame what we do in kind of those four categories. So first, with energy markets. The Secretary talked about his recent trip to Canada to review some hydro facilities. He talked, and many of the panelists have talked about the price of natural gas. There's a lot going on globally, nationally, and regionally from an energy perspective. And so it's very important for us in Massachusetts, both at the micro level within our state, but also within our region, because we share a grid with 5 other states, to really understand what is necessary for us to continue to reduce costs over time and green the grid, comply with our Global Warming Solutions Act goals. So on the energy supply and energy grid front, we've been very focused in a number of key areas. One of them has been on large-scale hydro, understanding the costs and benefits of large-scale hydro. That's an important part for us to understand. Understanding how does that, if hydro does come in greater quantities than it does now, how does it get here and what are the costs for transmission? And so DOER is in the process now of doing a comprehensive evaluation of large-scale hydro. At the same time, natural gas is a big issue. We know natural gas prices have come down. And one of the previous speakers, Jim, talked about the desire for more natural gas connections in Massachusetts. From our perspective, we need to understand the whole gas distribution universe. And so we've engaged, again, in an evaluation of gas distribution in Massachusetts, understanding where the supply is, where there may or may not be constraints, what is the universe of potential for expanding the distribution system in Massachusetts. At the same time, we're looking at renewable thermal technologies. Renewable thermal, as David will talk about, is a true emerging opportunity for us in Massachusetts. Other states have incentivized renewable thermal technologies, and so we're looking at the integration of both gas distribution and renewable thermal. How do they work together or not? And what is the correct pathway forward for Massachusetts? We also just completed a procurement for renewables, a long-term contract renewables procurement, which successful procurement process that will lock in renewable energy from Maine and New Hampshire at prices under 8 cents. That is an important part of our overall energy strategy for Massachusetts. And then grid modernization is another action item that I would suggest is within that whole category of energy supply and grid. The Department of Public Utilities opened up a docket. We participated, DOER, with many of you in this room on how to modernize our grid. And what does that mean? What does that mean to the individual? What does that mean from a state perspective? And how can we build in resiliency into the grid at the same time? On the renewable side, and I know a number of speakers have talked about it, Massachusetts has seen great success, particularly in solar PV. And as was mentioned previously, our agency is working on the next iteration of our solar program here in Massachusetts. We've had a very successful solar SREC program, and as the Secretary mentioned, shortly this fall we'll be proceeding with the rulemaking so that in Q1 of the next calendar year we transition from the existing SREC program to a new SREC program. And I can go into a little bit more detail about what our framework is and our objectives with the SREC 2 program. In wind and combined heat and power, Massachusetts has seen a significant increase, again, because of the incentives and policies that are in place and because of the vibrant sector that's been created. On the energy efficiency side, we are very proud that for the past 2 years we've been ranked #1. That's not just a title. There are a lot of reasons why Massachusetts earned that distinction, and a lot of that has to do with the people in this room and the residents and businesses that have taken advantage of our energy efficiency programs. We're in the midst of we're in the first year of the next 3-year plans, and as the Secretary mentioned, our investments are over $2 billion, which will yield net benefits of close to $7 billion. And that's real. Our experience from the first 3 plans has demonstrated that we have the right model in place, that we have the right framework for incentivizing businesses and residents to focus on energy efficiency. But there's indeed more to do. In the 3-year plans, we have focused our efforts in a number of areas, including commercial and industrial, ways to go deeper with deep energy retrofits, to focus on the landlord-tenant challenge that we all face, both in multifamily, but also in the commercial and industrial space. Focusing on community mobilization programs as well to really get into communities and neighborhoods to drive more energy efficiency. Green communities, we're here in Worcester in a designated green community. There are 110 across the Commonwealth, we like to say from Cape Cod to the Berkshires, representing almost 50% of the state's population. That's quite a success when cities and towns across Massachusetts have taken on this pledge, this commitment, and they've seen results. They've been able to drive down costs, they've been able to improve their greenhouse gas emissions profile, and they've been able to create jobs and establish a more vibrant economy for the clean energy sector through the 5 criteria that they've had to implement. So we're very proud of that. And then finally, let me talk a little bit about alternative transportation, because I think that's one area that we don't necessarily talk about very often, but is equally important from an energy perspective. We are focused on a number of initiatives. I, along with the Undersecretary for Energy and the Undersecretary for Environment, are now chairing an EV task force to figure out ways to really develop a comprehensive plan for deploying more EV in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. At the same time, our Clean Cities Initiative is working on a number of different programs to promote alternative fuels, biofuels. We see that as a very promising area to help businesses reduce costs, fleets to reduce costs, and to further reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And then working with our colleagues at DEP with their EVIP program, which is to help deploy electric vehicles across the Commonwealth as well. So those are some of the main issues that we're focused on at DOER to get to where the governor expects us to be, but also to ensure that we're on this trajectory for a long period of time. The Secretary talked about kind of our historic challenges we have here in New England at the end of the pipeline with historically higher energy prices than the other parts of the nation. And so we have to ensure that the things that we do now have very positive implications for future generations. So I'll end with that and pass it on to the next panelist, but look forward to your questions, and we'll be happy to dig deeper on some of these topics.
Thank you. Dive right in, Tim.
Great, will do. Well, thank you for that, Mark. I mean, it's very exciting to be here again, with this crowd. I talk a lot of the same things every year, but they are still as important as ever. The whole notion of efficiency first has to be something that we all concentrate on. There's so many opportunities we all have at our homes and businesses, and let's not forget the homes, and let's not forget in our businesses how we can engage our employees to do more efficiency at their homes as well, both thermal, whether it's gas or oil, or whether it's electrical. We really need to drive that home. We've got lots of funding available because of the 3-year plans, because of the Green Communities Act, because of the partnership the utilities have with the DOER and the state out there. So there are huge opportunities. I think we corrected masssave.org, I think it might be, versus masssave.com, but whatever, MassSave, you'll find it out there. And there's huge amounts of programs, and especially the financing opportunities are really, really tremendous out there. One of the things I want to talk about is that linkage between the efficiency and the policies surrounding, distributed generation in general, whether it's a solar project or it's a wind project or even combined heat and power. We've had quite a bit of success here in Massachusetts getting a lot more combined heat and power installed. A lot of different hospitals have done a lot of work. UMass upgraded their system. Clark University upgraded theirs recently. So there's a lot of opportunity there when you've got that real good thermal and electric match so you can really reduce your greenhouse gas emissions in that way. There are certain places where it really works well. It doesn't have to be these large hospitals or large industrial concerns. It can be, different things like different types of housing for the elderly, where you have a lot of domestic hot water use. You may not be able to put a 500 or 1,000 kilowatt machine there, but you can still get away with a 60, a 75, or 150 kilowatt engine set that really has a real good thermal electric match and really helps that customer save a lot of money and helps the Commonwealth make their goals here. One of the things that we talk about a lot in terms of the whole distributed generation, especially the solar world, I mean, as you heard, we are currently, it appears, at the public cap. There's a whole new system out there that folks can get assurance of net metering. The reason that's there is because up until that was put in place, you couldn't be assured you'd get net metering until you went online and there was still room under the present cap. So the system of assurance is really designed to help people have certainty, knowing that when the investments they make on the studies that have to be done to make sure there's no adverse impact to the neighbors, I mean, that's the key piece here. When we look at a distributed generation project, we are looking specifically to make sure it doesn't affect the reliability or quality of power for the neighbors around them. And that's the reason for those studies which we have to have through the interconnection process. But it's through those studies we identify things folks have to do to make sure they don't affect the neighbors, because these systems are going online with thousands of other customers. The circuit a certain distributed generation project is interconnected to probably serves anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 other customers. So it's critically important that we make sure that as we integrate that, and we're trying to move away from the notion of interconnection of distributed generation to really the integration of distributed generation. How can we as a utility use some of this capacity for the needs for our customers to increase reliability? There's some challenges there because ultimately it hasn't really been designed that way. The standards and codes we use for that interconnection typically aren't really designed for integration. There's a big effort just starting out in early December to try to revisit some of those IEEE standards so we can talk about more of this integration of this sort of equipment so that the value stream of distributed generation can be spread to more customers than simply the one who installs that system at their site. It's something really exciting that we're working on in our Utility of the Future work, besides the smart grid work that we're doing here in Worcester. It's also how do we use all this capacity? We have about 125 megawatts of distributed generation interconnected, with the bulk of that being, in a lot of cases, large solar farms. You've driven by and seen them, 1 to 2 to 3 megawatt size projects. These are huge systems out there. They're typically put in rural areas because the land was available and relatively inexpensive. So they're, in those particular aspects, they're probably not as useful for the local utility to use, if you will. But with the new program that the DOE is talking about, the SREC 2, where we're going to try to incent at a higher level the smaller, truly distributed facilities, that's where the true value, we think, will come. The load pockets, like downtown Worcester, are an ideal place to install distributed generation because that's where the capacity relief can really help the utilities. And it's that sort of integration we need to work on as we go forward. But the integration is all about both that capacity of the distributed generation and the integration for that end-use customer to be as efficient as possible before investing in that. Because again, we want to leverage the dollars that all our customers pay for these programs. There's significant subsidies out there, which has been fabulous to get the projects going and moving forward. But how do we now leverage those dollars so that we can do things in the future, that we can optimize things for all of our customers out there and get and reduce the greenhouse gases as much as possible out there. So it's really exciting times here. I've got lots of, I can answer questions about anything to do with interconnection. I don't want to bore folks here who aren't interested in that now, but there's lots of details in it. There's been a lot of changes have had to be made in some of the regulations because they just didn't seem to be working properly. So there's certain rules about eligibility of net metering, et cetera, et cetera. Again, don't want to bore the crowd on this today, but happy to answer specific questions or connect with you offline. Good.
Great.
Thank you, Tim. David?
Thank you, John. I'm delighted to be here for a second time today, this time with an opportunity to talk a little bit more about some of the work that I'm doing. And when I was talking with Peter Stanton and Chris Prosser about this panel, they asked me if I would look ahead and specifically talk about what's going on in the legislature here in Massachusetts. What are the energy initiatives on the horizon that may be coming and that might be of interest to you. So I want to mention 3 items and focus in on 2 of them that may be of immediate interest or long-term interest to you. We are very fortunate to have terrifically hardworking and very intelligent chairs of the Energy Committee here in Massachusetts. Senator Ben Downing and Representative John Keenan have been at the head of this committee now for several years. They shepherded the recent amendments to the Green Communities Act through last year and have a targeted program of things that they still want to do this year before the session ends next summer. And the 3 items which I think really are on the sort of priority list there would be a piece of legislation that would address issues related to gas distribution systems. There's a growing concern about both safety and economic losses related to leakage from gas pipelines. Utility companies want to and need to make upgrades to those systems. The legislature is almost certainly going to be doing a bill that will clarify and strengthen the sort of framework for analyzing strategizing and ultimately implementing upgrades to gas infrastructure. That's a utility-focused piece of legislation, so I'm not going to spend much time today on that one. But I do want to talk about two others that I think are coming. One of them is a piece of legislation that would essentially create more flexibility for commercial and industrial and institutional customers to install combined heat and power systems and create microgrids, they're sometimes called. Essentially, systems whereby a customer can install their own generating equipment, on-site generation equipment, and distribute electricity to buildings in its immediate area. And so this piece of legislation would allow for those customers, if they wanted to contract to install their own wires and within a limited radius, not further than a couple of streets, 2 rights of way, for example. But those customers would then be able to take advantage of both the thermal output and the electrical output for that system, so increasing pretty significantly the sort of economic value of that installation. So that's a piece of legislation that is under consideration and has had a hearing and will probably be considered next spring. A third item is a bill that would create incentives for the installation of heating and cooling systems that use renewable fuels. This is Senate Bill 1593. It was filed by Senator Feingold of Andover, but it would basically provide a financial credit for systems that utilize solar energy, geothermal energy, biogas or biodiesel, and so on, any renewable fuel to create either heating and cooling. This is a significant expansion of the sort of broader greenhouse gas carbon reduction strategy of the Commonwealth, because right now incentives are really exclusively limited to technologies that produce electricity. And while those are critically important and they've been in place for a number of years, about 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions come from building operations and from heating and cooling, and we still have a lot of structures here in the Commonwealth that are using petroleum or even natural gas and producing significant greenhouse gas emissions. So where those facilities can be converted to these alternative fuels, the Commonwealth is seriously interested in encouraging that. And so this would provide for those facilities to earn credits, much as they do if they produce electricity, but now for heating production. So it would draw a equivalency between thermal output and electrical output and provide them with alternative energy credits, currently valued in the vicinity of about $7 per megawatt hour. So not as rich as the incentives available for producing electricity, but significant help to get these technologies into the marketplace. And so if you're a customer who's looking at your thermal bills and seeing that they're high, your cooling bills, air conditioning and so forth, these technologies may be significantly more economically feasible in the near future if this legislation is to be enacted. So I can say more about the details of these bills and so forth, but those are the things that are coming on the horizon, and I'd be happy to answer questions from the audience about them.
Great. Thank you all. I would just mention one other piece of legislation on Beacon Hill that hasn't been drafted yet, and it's not to create a fistfight amongst the 4 people on the stage who have a different answer as to what should happen in terms of the net metering cap that I referenced earlier. If you're a municipality in the Commonwealth, in the National Grid service territory today, and you're counting on savings, budgeting for savings from solar energy projects, if you're not within that cap, you're not going to get those savings, have those community and economic and environmental benefits until the legislature acts to raise the net metering cap. Similarly, for those in the private sector, soon the same phenomenon will face National Grid customers here. The NSTAR isn't far away from that, and so as we look at a long-term energy policy for the Commonwealth, especially around renewables and solar in particular, we have to solve this net metering cap issue in the short term, or we are going to have a phenomenon not unlike what happened in New Jersey. The administration's put a very thoughtful plan together for a managed market, I think it's called, but basically parceling out another 1,000 megawatts or so over the next 6 or 7 years in a measured and controlled fashion, and appropriately so. But that's not going to happen unless we address this net metering cap, and that's a piece of legislation, as I say, that isn't even yet written. So we can get into that more if you like. I know Tim and National Grid have some well-developed and still developing thoughts in that regard. Others of us in the development community similarly, and it's a balance and a challenge really that Mark and David and clients that he represents need to face. So as we touch on important bills, as David did before the legislature in the here and now, I would add that to the list, and maybe we can come back and talk about that, or Mark, if you...
Yeah, I think it is important. I mean,
as the World Wrestling Federation up here shortly.
As John pointed out, we have, for National Grid, their public cap has been met 3%. And we've gone through various legislative sessions to increase the cap, first to bring equity between the public and private caps, and along the way increasing the cap to where it is now 3% and 3%. And it has been a very useful tool, particularly for municipalities who have multiple buildings in their building stock, and it's an effective way for them to use renewable energy in a distributed fashion. That said, none of this is viewed in a vacuum. We're actually in the process now of evaluating what should be done next. So we're evaluating the costs and benefits of the existing net metering program, as well as what the costs and benefits would be if we increase the cap by a certain percent, and we're also evaluating other policy options. It has been a successful mechanism. We need to continue that momentum, and we're working as DOER with our partners on identifying the most appropriate steps forward.
And just, I want to comment a little bit on the public cap is full when you look at the website. However, it's full with proposed projects from developers, and in many cases, those projects don't have specific off-takers in mind yet. They've discussed that they're going to have a public project. That's been their declaration in that system of assurance. But yet there's this separate Schedule Z that has to be presented that shows exactly who they're going to allocate those credits to. And in many cases, those aren't fully fleshed out. So I would suggest there is still room under that public cap for entities who are interested in that by approaching many of those entities, and it's all on the website, who's got what out there, and approaching those entities and finding out just have they allocated their complete output, if you will, or not. And also, there's a lot of flux in that. There's certain requirements you have to meet over in certain time frames. And when people miss a requirement, they're essentially kicked out of that particular cap, and then that frees up room. There's a current waiting list out there. So I wouldn't suggest that everyone's shut out of this at all, because I think there's a lot of movement around until the projects actually are constructed, and many still aren't. Again, there's 160 or so megawatts in our public cap, but we only have potential about 70 or 80 actually built and constructed and operable or under construction now. So there's a lot of flux that's going to happen in the next year or so, and it's really important for us to understand where that goes through, because again, as I talked earlier, the socialized costs of these programs need to be looked at, and as Mark mentioned, the costs and benefits really need to be looked at. Are there different things we could do to leverage some of that opportunity? Again, as I suggested earlier, requiring a certain amount of efficiency to be done to be eligible for full net metering credits would be something that we could work toward, so that those entities we know have all the state policies in mind of efficiency, the first fuel, clean energy, et cetera, et cetera.
This will be a debate and a discussion that will take place in multiple forums over the next couple of months. And it's probably, we don't want to maybe dive as deeply into some of the minutia of the policy side as we could if I let this go in that direction. But there's a lot to be said on this. I think one thing that we all would agree with is that the program as it exists now has been a very, very successful program. There's no doubt about that. But to continue that success, the program's going to have to look different than it does now. And as Mark mentioned earlier, they've put out a policy framework for how that program might change. The draft regulations will be out shortly, and the debate will continue from there. But it's an exciting time from a policy standpoint because there's much to celebrate, but there's so many of these issues that are complex and for which appropriate balance has to be struck. And these are all people that are very deeply engaged in that discussion. So I'm sure you'll have a chance to hear their opinions in the future. Let's turn it to you to dive deeper into the minutia of SREC caps or go more broadly. Yes.
And we have a company called WetTech, and we've been looking at the state to look at a technology that helps reduce all of these things you're talking about. Most of your talk was on heating and cooling in buildings, commercial buildings, and also the transmission of electricity. What we've been looking at is through the use of ozone. We've been at it 29 years. We can reduce washroom water temperature from 160 to 180 down to about 110. It's very effective. It's the disinfectant. If you were to take a look at all of the hotels, motels, nursing homes, colleges, prisons, or anything that actually, the commercial laundries or industrial laundries that are using water constantly to get these our linens clean or even reusable wipers clean, that's a lot of water and a lot of temperature that could be saved. It's a lot of BTUs that would be saved that affects greenhouse gas emissions. And we've had trouble for 29 years getting the state to look at the technology. I've called Mass Save. I've written to the governor. I've written to the governor's energy office. We do have some good certification through Australia, Belgium, and Europe. We've got a lot of installations here in the United States. Prisons are very interested in it because it kills MRSA, and the prison guards don't like to handle prisoners without knowing what's going on with their clothing. And yet, in the state of Massachusetts, and we're located right here in Worcester, we can't get the state to even take a look at it or entertain the thought of what ozone can do for saving energy and greenhouse gas emissions.
I'd say you're making a good start right now, and with that, Mark, maybe address that, or Tim.
I think a great opportunity there is through our custom energy efficiency programs, where what customers do is they present opportunities like this to us. They show the engineering data, we review it, and in many cases we agree to go forward and pay rebates for that sort of thing, depending on all the criteria and all the rest of it. But you're right, we've looked at this multiple times. I unfortunately had to go into a prison to see it once, and I never want to go back. But it does work. There's no question. But I think what we might be missing is to approach National Grid directly with a project in our footprint, and with the data that supports the energy savings claims, and we can try to push it through the custom program. We've got a whole crowd of folks at the table over here on the right over here, Reserve National Grid table. Great, thanks.
I don't know if this is directly relevant to your question and your need, but the Secretary and Mark and I think Galen touched on an aspect of the Clean Energy Center and the administration's focus now, which is water-related technologies, and for good reason, as most of you know. It's also, interestingly, where the venture capital money that was very invested in technologies on the renewable side, a lot of that for renewable companies now, it's hard with technologies, it's hard to get that venture capital, and one reason is they're migrating to clean water technology, recognizing the global significance of that issue. So I don't know if it's necessarily directly relevant to you, but for those of you in the water policy or technology area, I think there's will be more coming from the state and other opportunities in the private sector to advance those efforts. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Grossman. One of the big challenges with renewables, particularly solar and wind, is that they are intermittent and non-dispatchable and can, in extreme cases, cause disturbances to the grid. So what has been done and what needs to be done from a policy perspective to ensure grid stability and reliability, given the need to integrate these resources into the grid?
Super question.
Thank goodness you've got National Grid here, because we know exactly what we need to do there.
Even if they're not right on net metering, they do know some things. They're spot
There's
on.
no question there's been some challenges around the country with the intermittency of wind. Texas, the North Plateau up in New York, et cetera, for these large-scale projects. For us at the local distribution system level, that's a whole reason we go through the impact study, to determine what won't cause problems to the neighbors. And there are certain limitations on how much intermittent resources we can accept on a local distribution circuit that feeds thousands of other customers. For larger projects, we build dedicated circuits, so they're the only one on the feeder. So if there's issues, only they'll see them. So again, that's the reason there are these IEEE standards. Again, at the distribution level, I think it's very tightly controlled, and we're in good shape. And the good news is that the technology continues to improve for things like storage and whatnot to actually prevent, when you get larger amounts of cluster DG in an area, to prevent those problems from causing issues for other customers.
Yeah, and I'd just like to follow up that. I mean, to Tim's point, we've been engaged for well over a year with the utilities and other stakeholders in the whole interconnection process, and really working together to make sure we balance the important needs that the distribution companies have for their assets, but also for the continued effective deployment of renewables. And we've come a long way and made a lot of improvements, particularly related to the concern that you raised.
Just two additional points on that. One is storage is certainly going to be an important part of that, and there's a lot of investment that the Commonwealth is making through the Clean Energy Center and that venture capital communities and others are making to enhance the economics of battery storage. So that's growing mitigation, I think, to that problem. The other is something that I know Grid is giving serious thought to, and as we look to how to incentivize solar energy or other renewables, is there are portions in the grid where large generating systems actually will help in terms of reliability of the system, where it matches up with other system upgrades that need to be met for reliability and other purposes. So as we look at how do you better meet social goals and policy goals, whether it be using brownfields, which is an area where the administration is encouraging greater incentives for solar. Another area is to deal with some of these problems that, in terms of grid capacity and efficiency. And National Grid, to their credit, is giving a lot of thought to that as well. Yes, sir.
Hi, good morning. Blaine Marchand, Middlesex Savings Bank. Tim, I was wondering if you could speak to the typical turnaround time you're seeing today in terms of processing these interconnection agreements, and how that compares maybe over the last year or so. Is the time getting shorter? Is it getting longer? What are people to expect in that regard?
I mean, one of the principal background issues relative to the work we did with DOER was try to streamline that process. And we went from 0 to 1 million miles an hour from 2009 to 2011 with interconnection requests. 3 or 4 or 5 megawatts in the whole state of Mass that we serve, to, in 2012, 364 megawatts applied for interconnection in just that one calendar year. So it simply took time for us to build up the proper technical resources and train the contracting community to actually understand the needs for what we needed for these studies which I just mentioned here. So the good news news is when you're talking about the smaller projects, typically under 500 or so kilowatts, they can mostly go through what we call our expedited process, and they can be reviewed very quickly. Within 2 or 3 months, you can have an interconnection agreement in front of you. The larger megawatt scale solar farms, they have additional impacts. They take more to look at, and especially when you get into the cluster nature. If you've only got a single DG project in an area, it's pretty straightforward, pretty, I won't say easy, but it's pretty straightforward. Once you start to get lots of them on a circuit, again, you've got our circuits have peak loads of maybe 8 megawatts or 8,000 kilowatts. Once you get to 2 and 3 and 4,000 kilowatts or 2 or 3 or 4 megawatts on that feeder, there's a lot of other things we've got to be careful of. And there's significant substation modifications that need to be made in order to make sure we don't have the impacts as suggested by the other person asking questions. So I think the good news is we definitely sped that up. If the SREC 2 program, it has a different financial model that promotes smaller projects or medium-sized projects, I think these unfortunate long-term delays, and I know it took us sometimes 8, 9, 10 months to get some studies done, back in the 2010-11 timeframe. I can see those going away, and there's also, recently negotiated with the DOER and just provided to the Department of Public Utilities for approval is an enforcement mechanism that kind of keeps our feet to the fire to make sure we meet that we consistently meet those timelines. So customers will know what to expect when they read the tariff, when they can expect to see that agreement.
One person's perspective that's on the other end of the equation, as it were, putting these proposals forward, it is so much better than it was 2 or 3 years ago, as Tim says, and this DG working group that came up with various penalties and to some degree incentives for the utilities to be even more efficient or timely in their response represents some progress as well. I think they also need substantially more resources, and that they should be rewarded for investing those resources and get a return on that investment just like they do on a system upgrade or otherwise. And so I think there's some further work and incentives that from a public policy standpoint that could perhaps improve upon an improving but not yet perfect framework for this. We have time for one more question, Peter says. And we have 3 people, and I'll add myself as a fourth. I'd be happy to answer questions more informally afterwards, but we'll take one final question here.
Hi, it's Matt Shortsleeve with Mercury Solar. This is for David O'Connor, and maybe for Commissioner as well. With the emerging thermal Senate bill that's being reviewed, is there, you mentioned it would be, you're trying to make it eligible for Class 1 RECs. Solar had its own kind of carve out and its own special REC. Is there any consideration to move it beyond like a Class 1 or make it a special REC? Just seems that the valuation of the Class 1 is so low that it may not provide that type of incentive to move the needle against kind of our thermal needs.
Well, the short answer is no. I will. Okay. For those who may have trouble keeping track of these incentives, there essentially are 3 tiers of incentives. There are solar incentives, which at the highest sort of level, Class 1 renewable incentives, and then alternative energy credits. The thermal legislation that I've talked about would provide alternative energy credits for thermal production, so essentially the lowest end. Why is that? Well, there are a variety of reasons, but probably the most important one is that you're talking about relatively unsophisticated technologies here. Solar thermal, to give you one simple example. Also, let's say wood pellets used in boilers, or bio oils added to heating oil. None of these require highly sophisticated, capital-intensive investments to be economic. And whereas electricity generation, and particularly using solar PV, requires a much more substantial incentive. So the Commonwealth quite appropriately tries to stratify these incentives so that they only provide them at the level that is needed, of course, because ultimately it's ratepayers who are going to be asked to pay for these incentives. So the simple answer is that's the level that these, and as I mentioned earlier, in this case around $7 a megawatt hour, give or take. So that's.
I'll say, I'll say to follow up on what David said, we are also at DOER doing a go-to-market evaluation of renewable thermal to really understand what market exists, how do we get to the market level we need to be at to be consistent with our goals under the the Global Warming Solutions Act. That's not to suggest that there will be some sort of carve out, but I will say that we've been deploying a number of pilots. Galen mentioned that earlier on renewable thermal. We have the Sapphire pilot, which is working with regional school districts and housing authorities on the deployment of renewable thermal. So I think you will continue to see different pilot programs that evaluate the deployment of renewable thermal, and if it's incorporated into the alternative portfolio standard, that will help as well. And the only other thing, if you would give me 1 minute, I did see one of my staff members here, and I want to recognize him, Jerry Bingham, who's in the back. Jerry did a lot of work on the DG working group. We really appreciate his efforts, and if you have any really in the weeds questions about the interconnection process, Jerry loves those, and he'll be happy to answer them.
When I was going to introduce Mark, one of the things I wanted to mention as to why I think he's really a great leader is he really attracts very bright, capable people. Jerry is one, Dwayne Brager, Mike Judge, others that are working in this area, really terrific. I want to say Meg Colclaw, but Meg Lusardi, who runs the Green Communities Act, is a terrific team. So anyone at DOER, I think, is going to serve you well. They serve the Commonwealth well, and the panel has served all this well. So I want to conclude by thanking Peter Stanton and Chris Prosser for putting on a great event, and our panel for contributing to it. Thanks.
Okay, folks, I just discovered from the way John was speaking to this microphone that you don't actually have to put it up near your mouth and make it difficult to hear. We have a book for all of our panelists. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I'll use my loud voice. David, thank you for your double duty. I think he's got 2 books. Someone should hit up David for a book. We'll have a raffle at the end. Anyways, because we've been running about 10 minutes late today, we're going to go straight into the next panel. I know there are some conversations that are going to go on. And when I say the next panel, there's actually 2. The panel in this room is our case studies program, which is being moderated by Vincent DeVito and has Stephen Capizzo and Robert Daniels on it. And there's a parallel panel going on sort of right around the corner in Exhibit Room A, which is just as you walk back out the hallway, the first room on your left in that direction, and that is a National Grid-specific program on their Smart Energy Solutions program, which is the local pilot that is operating here in Worcester. So that's going to go on at the same time as this one. And so I am going to ask Stephen Capizzo, who is the VP of Health Tracks, Fitness and Wellness Centers, and Robert Daniels, the Associate Director of Facilities and Environmental Health and Safety Officer at Worcester State University, to come up on the panel, and then let me tell you who our moderator is. Another person who, with a very, very long resume, which I'm going to kind of just grab some highlights from, but a very qualified person. Vincent DeVito is a corporate and regulatory attorney at Bowditch & Dewey, who represents utilities, corporations, investors, and entrepreneurs in the energy, power, and generation and technology sectors. Vincent has worked in the General Counsel's Office of the U.S. Department of Energy and has served as the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Energy for Policy and International Affairs. He also worked for the state as an energy lawyer and was deeply involved in the development and implementation of the state's electric utility deregulation plan. He currently serves as the director of the Institute for Energy and Sustainability, is a member of the Worcester City Managers Energy Task Force, and sits on the advisory board for Greenopolis.com, and is on the board of the Association of Clean Tech Incubators of New England. He's a frequent television commentator and speaker and author on issues regarding energy and technology, and today we're pleased to have him as a moderator and back again at this summit as a repeat voice helping our audience learn about these issues. So, Vincent, it's all yours.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you. It's good to be back here, and thank you to the Business Journal for hosting this event every year. Thank you for staying for this panel. This event gets better and better every year. The participation grows greatly, and I think we learn more. And we learn more by having these interactive conferences because Massachusetts is leading the way, which will be good for this particular panel on energy efficiency with regards to deploying sustainable efforts. And one thing I like to add when we talk about sustainability is that it kind of has this, politically it has this lefty or greeny connotation to it, but it has nothing to do with that. Sustainability is a business investment, and if the business metrics do not work, sustainability investments do not happen. And one of the hats I wear, you may have heard, is with the Institute for Energy and Sustainability, which is here in Worcester. Chris Noonan is here over at the National Grid table if you would like to learn more about IES. The other interesting thing that's happened over the years since this conference was launched is that colleges and universities, the engineering schools, WPI is one, Clark's another, WSU have started doing sustainability courses, which cover a whole bunch of things. Again, it has nothing to do with policies, but they have everything to do with economics and engineering. So this is a good story. I think in 2006 or 2007, I was given a presentation in Toronto, and there were about 300 people in the room, and I asked who knew what sustainability was or who had a definition for sustainability. And at the time, you would get 300 answers or no answers. Nobody really knew what it was. Now, all that dynamic has changed because the business investment makes sense. So I would probably call this panel not case studies, but the business case for sustainability. So each of our panelists have a PowerPoint, so I'll invite you to come up here because you can see your PowerPoint better as opposed to up there and give your presentation. And Steve Capezzo from HealthTracks has worked with one of the sponsors of this event, World Energy, and he will talk about procurement. And then Bob Daniels from Worcester State University, who runs the operations there, will talk about some of the investments they made. Steve? Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I want to thank you for having me. We're very excited about the events over the last 18 months, and I'm excited to share them with you. First of all, let me tell you a little bit about HealthTracks. We're a company that operates 18 fitness and wellness centers across 8 states. We formed this company back in 1979. Our corporate offices are in Glastonbury, Connecticut. Kind of a little profile about what our facilities look like. They're 30 to 50,000 square foot facilities. They're included in those facilities are our gym, traditional fitness floors, as many of you may be familiar with, group fitness studios, basketball, racquetball, swimming pools. So it's a pretty comprehensive health club. But also in our facilities, one of the unique things about HealthTracks is that we affiliate ourselves with local hospitals. So each of our facilities has a local hospital, and the hospital brings different wellness programs and clinical services into the facility, like cardiac rehab and physical therapy and diabetes programs and health education and the like, nutrition, weight management, et cetera. So our facilities are kind of a box that's filled with the full continuum of well care all the way to sick care or sick care to well care. And it's kind of a non-intimidating facility. Primary groups that we serve are families, baby boomers, seniors, etc. Moving on, I'm not sure where I point this, but okay, here we go. Just a little profile. Prior to 2012, just to give you kind of a sense for our energy needs and consumption, we were utilizing approximately 17 million kilowatts annually of electricity. We have about half of our facilities are 25 to 30 years old, so as you can imagine, one of the challenges that we face is that we're in a very capital-intensive business. Members like to see all the new and greatest fitness equipment, so there's a big competition for capital, and so a lot of our older facilities were really in need of extensive mechanical and lighting upgrades. Our biggest energy consumers, HVAC, lighting, hot water. And one of the challenges that we faced is that being kind of a decentralized company, there's a lot of autonomy at the center level for the general manager making decisions. So we hadn't really pulled energy together centrally. A lot of decisions were made on a center-by-center basis. So the dilemma that we had, we needed extensive and expensive updates on our mechanicals and lighting. We had the fortunate to have a 30-year relationship with a fellow named Bruce Buckby. He operated fitness facilities in the Boston area, and we've known him for many, many years. Bruce is now with World Energy. Bruce came down and called on us. We had a meeting. We talked about our situation. He talked about opportunities that World Energy could bring to the table. We formed a bit of a partnership moving forward, creating a comprehensive plan for energy in 2012. The first thing that we focused on at World Energy is to go to the online reverse auctions. That was very, very successful for us. We were able to secure a 25% reduction in our energy supply costs. So immediately for us, that was close to $200,000 a year of savings right off the bat. And we were never familiar, we hadn't been familiar with the reverse auction concept. What a great concept and very successful for us. Next, we moved into looking at some energy efficiency upgrades, looking at our HVAC systems and our lighting, and implementing new smart energy EMS systems. And so we had a plan that we executed that was approximately $1 million worth of improvements. Most of these were focused on the New England centers, which happened to be our older centers and the centers that had the biggest need. The home run for us was that we were able to really do this, self-fund this budget through three different venues. One was taking some of the money that we saved from the energy procurement. We also, World Energy worked diligently to get significant utility incentives for the retrofits, and also to implement low-interest on-bill financing, which minimized our out-of-pocket expenses. All told, $1 million worth of upgrades cost us about $25,000 out of pocket, so it was a huge home run. We don't have many home runs. I'm excited to say this was huge for us. So, kind of some of the challenges I want to just touch on. One is that some of these incentives and on-bill financing are limited in many states. As I mentioned before, we have facilities in 8 different states. So, but on the opportunity side, regulations are constantly evolving, and we're watching closely for those developments. We really feel like, for us, it was the low-hanging fruit that we were able to capitalize on, that we took advantage of, but we have many more opportunities, and we're looking forward to watching closely for any new developments that come across our states. The other challenge was, you know, as managing energy is getting more complex. We can't operate as we did in the past anymore with general managers making individual decisions. We've now brought energy as a kind of a strategic central initiative, which I'm heading up, but I can't stress enough that we really need the help of World Energy and all their expertise, and we're tackling that as a team. Every kilowatt dollar that we save positively affects our bottom line. One thing I would stress that for us is that we're in a very competitive industry. Any of you are familiar with the health club industry. There's a lot of downward pressure on pricing, a lot of $10 a month clubs opening up, a lot of competition. So whenever there's opportunities to put a dollar to the bottom line like this, we're all over it. And of course, the challenge becoming more green. I joke that what I'd like to see is someone develop a way to capture all the energy that's exerted in our health clubs and turn that into powering the lights in the HVAC systems. Because we got a lot of that going on with treadmills and ellipticals and bikes, as you can imagine, if we could just capitalize on that. But seriously, you know, we're looking at solar, we're looking at wind power, different ways to capture renewably sourced energy and credits and increase efficiency. I would say my one takeaway, the key takeaway for us is that when you're in 8 states and 18 facilities, there's so much to the energy equation. Finding a partner, and in our case, World Energy, to help us with those goals was paramount, and that's my suggestion, certainly as a takeaway, that you work with some experts if you're going to do this. But for us, couldn't be happier, home run, and looking forward to doing some things in the future with them. So thank you, appreciate it, and I'll turn it over to Robert.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bob Daniels, Associate Director of Facilities for Worcester State University, and I'm kind of the next tier down. You know, we heard from Secretary Sullivan this morning, and then Mark Sylvia, who is the DOER folks, and the executive branch of the Commonwealth, which we, as part of the Division of Higher Education in Massachusetts, fall under some direct direction from Commissioner Sylvia's department, which is DOER, and we fall under the Lead by Example program. So I'm kind of the proof in the pudding that the Commonwealth's putting their money where their mouth is, and I don't like that ringing. So we've done a whole smattering of different things, but I think in the general concept that I've heard from panelists before me is that you should develop a comprehensive plan. I'm a firm believer in the behavioral aspect of things, so it's great with the new technologies, but you got to train your people. There's a lot to be said for that. Sustainability successes, and we don't define necessarily sustainability. We're heavy into the energy thing. We do have 2 LEED Gold certified buildings, Dowden Hall, which was finished in 2010, which is a residence hall, and a complete gut and rehab of our administration building. We did focus heavily on energy, and as a minimum, the Commonwealth must meet stretch code requirements, and most times we exceed that. 2 additional LEED buildings. One of them, if anybody's been by our campus lately, we've got 157,000 square foot combination dining hall, residence hall going in. It's going to house 400 students and be able to feed about 550 people at any given time. Those are also slated to be LEED Gold as of right now. So the Commonwealth has to meet their LEED Plus certification, which in USGBC terms pretty much means LEED Silver. We, as the operators, being Worcester State University, we push and we do what we can to make sure that we meet that gold standard. Like I was alluding to earlier, we do have a host of different things. We have 2 solar PV arrays located on campus. One of them is a 105 kW system located on our library building, which the university owns. Wesleyan Hall is a power purchase agreement, in which case Amoresco owns the system, and we buy the power from those guys. The picture that you see in the lower right-hand corner is our library building. That's the 560 panel array up there. One of the other things that I heard a lot talked about this morning was combined heat and power, CHP cogeneration. And we currently have a 60 kW unit installed in Dowden Hall. That is a residence hall, and this 60 kW unit is pretty much providing hot water and heat in conjunction with boilers. So when we did the upgrade to Dowden Hall, it involved new windows, so we addressed building envelope issues. We also addressed update of boiler plant, and I'll get into that a little bit more. Building envelope, another building envelope project that we recently did is a $1.4 million project to our library building, which included, it had some kind of inherent water penetration problems. It was a building built in the 60s. But by this overclad process, we were able to increase energy efficiency by 10 to 15%, added new windows as well, and it seems to be working out pretty well. We've actually upgraded the chiller in that building, as well as all lighting projects that we tend to work on now. We focus on LED whenever we can. The other project, which I'll talk a little bit more in depth about, would be garage LED lighting retrofit. And then we actually have an agreement we have a net metering credit agreement with a facility up in Orange, Mass, in which case we're purchasing the net metering credits from a 2.5 megawatt facility up there. So I guess we'll touch base on this Dowden Hall project. Initially the project was $180,000. It was actually located in a new addition. The Dowden Hall renovation project that we did wasn't only a renovation to the existing building, but also incorporated another 177-bed addition. So the opportunity to put it in at the initial design was there. So it cost us $180,000. Designed to assist with the hot water and the heating load, in conjunction with boilers, high-efficiency, low-NOx boilers. It's supplying potable hot water, and we basically store that hot water in storage tanks versus a direct fire gas water heater. Natural gas-fired unit, it's designed to basically generate electricity. So we're firing a natural gas engine to generate electricity, and then use the waste heat, which is a byproduct of the combustion, to heat boiler and potable hot water. The unit averages, it's a 60 kW unit, but since it is on gas, it does modulate. So it will ramp up and down. Average output is about 55 kW. And again, getting back to, and I forget, maybe it was Rob Pratt that mentioned earlier, about you go into some of these places and you see these units turned off, or people aren't well-versed enough to maintain them. So we purchased a service and maintenance agreement, contract with this piece of equipment, which we use as a teaching tool. So our operators receive training initially, and then we follow up with basically monthly service calls, check on the system. We put our guys with them, and they stick with them like glue to get more versed with the equipment. At some point, we might be able to break away, but I'll get into some of the economics of the project. This isn't a commercial for Tecogen. We're a state agency, so we fall under, a lot of these building construction projects fall into Chapter 149, so the procurement laws are pretty tight. This is the successful bidder of this particular piece of equipment. So this is the current economics. For the most part, the unit ran 6,000 hours. Natural gas cost us $7.40 a decatherm. Electricity's running us somewhere around 13.5 cents a kilowatt hour right now. But then it kind of goes through the calculation. So 6,232 hours the unit ran. We, unlike some of the folks in the private sector, don't have the opportunity to realize the tax benefits. So we're looking at pretty much a $35,000, $36,000 a year net annual savings. I would caution you on having the manufacturer put the data together. It's a sales tool. And although if you understand how to read it, and I'll get into that a little bit more in the next slide, but this is kind of they can put together, and I guess that's the other thing is put some pressure on the people that, especially if you're paying them good money to put a unit in, there's nothing to, make sure you get what you want. You know, this was a condition up front as to what our expectations were, as how they were going to be able to report on their equipment. One thing, and I'll call to mention, I guess I wish I had a pointer, but down in the lower left-hand corner over there, it's listing a boiler efficiency, offset boiler efficiency of 70%. Well, we would not put in a 70% efficient boiler in any of our buildings. So these numbers may be a little bit elevated, I don't think substantially, but, oh, thank you. That was right over in there.
Like $5 million. Got my joke, thank you.
Parking garage LED retrofit. This is a $142,000 project. $50,000 was funded by National Grid. Another $50,000 came from DOER, Mark Silver's group. And then $42,000 was funded by the universities. Oops. It entailed removing 186 high-intensity discharge, 150-watt bulbs from, or total fixtures from our parking garage, and we replaced them one for one with a 60-watt LED fixture. There was a lot of going back and forth. In a lot of cases with the LED technology, you can actually minimize or cut or reduce the number of fixtures that you replace. From a public safety perspective, pressure from the people that own the parking garage and our public safety, our university police, we decided that it was easier to go with a one-to-one replacement. The reason that we did it, we expected about $100,000 hour LED light versus some of the costs that we were seeing associated with the other fixtures, which namely would be ballast and light bulb replacements at some set frequency. The other thing was the electrical consumption, and we've verified that it's down about 30% and the annual savings is about $16,000. But again, I guess if you look at some of the economics of, you know, we took out 150 kW or 150 watt fixture, replaced it with a 60 watt fixture. We were kind of anticipating that our savings should be more. So we were looking at opportunities to discover why we weren't seeing that type of savings. And lo and behold, you know, and I guess the point to be taken away from this is make sure that you got a handle on your process, that you're looking at the information that's available. But there's other things happening in our parking garage. We have a maintenance area that's heated with electric heaters. There are stairway lighting, elevator lighting. Even usage of our parking garage is, when we first put it in, it wasn't too highly accepted. People didn't want to walk from that portion of campus. Now it's a necessity. Now it's pretty much seeing 100% use all the time. We're open 24/7 for the most part, other than with some scheduled shutdowns, but being a public institution, there's always something going on. And I think that's probably about all that I have to talk about. So we'll leave the rest for questions and answers, I guess.
Thank you, gentlemen. The, excuse me. One question for Steve. Where are your facilities in Massachusetts? Some free advertising.
Hello? Oh, yeah, we are in West Springfield, Massachusetts, East Long Meadow, Massachusetts, North Dartmouth, Massachusetts, and Hanover, Massachusetts.
So we, I think, heard pretty soundly the business case for sustainability investment. One thing, Bob, that came up that may need a more additional explanation is the stretch code and how the stretch code is not something that everybody is aware of or knows about. Could you explain it a little bit more?
Well, the stretch code in Massachusetts pertains predominantly, and I think Mark had alluded to a decent explanation earlier about its tie to the Massachusetts Building Code with respect to the energy efficiency portion of buildings. Currently, that stretch code requires that buildings be built to 20% better than what base design electrical code is. So light fixtures, savings, things like motion sensors in offices, efficiencies of HVAC equipment, those types of things. So.
Okay. You also mentioned, Bob, that the university was unable to take advantage of the tax credits. Do you know what they may have been worth?
I'm sorry?
You said that the university was unable to, because it's a public institution, it's not nonprofit, can't take advantage of the tax credits. Do you know what they may have been worth?
I believe the difference was somewhere in the tune of $50,000 on that example, on an annual basis.
Which is amazing, because usually the tax credits make this work. I wasn't sure, I didn't see it, Steve, in your presentation, but you must have took advantage of the tax credits as well.
Yeah, we took advantage. We took advantage of the tax credits in both Massachusetts, well, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. Don't know, I can't remember exactly how it broke out on each state, but I can tell you that overall, our $1 million project, we had about $200,000 of that $1 million was in tax credits aggregately. So, 20% of the whole project, free money. We were pretty excited about that.
So I think one of the most important things that Steve said was that he's in a downward pricing industry, which I feel bad for. That's going to be tough. But I understand it, and it's highly competitive. So the important thing he said was that these investments really do improve the bottom line, and that's the lesson from this panel, in my opinion. With that, if I'll open it up to the floor for any questions.
Can I just elaborate on that? Because you brought up a great point. I did not do this in my presentation, but from our standpoint, over a 5-year period, we're looking at $1 million directly to our bottom line in terms of mostly from the procurement side, as I mentioned, about $200,000 a year there. Now, we are saving additional money with the $1 million worth of upgrades. However, as I also mentioned, there's on-bill financing. We're paying that back. So over a 3-year period, the great news for us from our P&L standpoint is that our utility bill looks the same. However, what's in there is a reduction in energy and now a payback to the utility companies from the financing. So we didn't incur more expenses. We're not going down, but in 3 years, all of those savings then will go directly to our bottom line as well because the financing will be paid off. So just a huge economic windfall for us.
For you. There's a question here from Peter.
Well, it wasn't a question. I just wanted to, if I remember Robert's slide correctly, I think you mentioned it was $35,000 without the tax credits, and I think your number on that $180,000 investment added up to $90,000 or $95,000, which was sort of a 2-year ROI when they sort of implied that what the tax credits would be were you a for-profit organization.
That's correct.
Yes, in the back.
Thank you. John Tian from Northeast Real Estate Solutions. Steve, you mentioned more or less in jest that perhaps if someone could get you some exercise equipment that would generate electricity, you'd be better off. There is exercise equipment available like that. I've done a Google search on it, so there's a few manufacturers out there. So I don't know if that's something you really want to look at or not, but certainly that could be something that would show you in a better light and show you as even a more forward-thinking company than what you're doing currently. Take a look at it.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, we're familiar with some of that being developed, but from our standpoint, it's still kind of in the beta test phase, so we're keeping an eye on that, but thank you.
That's the long answer. What really happened, I'm assuming, is that you consulted with legal counsel and they said no way. The other interesting thing that WSU had up there was, Bob, your the information you receive. I think you referenced it as from the manufacturer.
Yes.
And how it's also kind of, which is a unique thing, how it's also a sell document. And you mentioned that, so you might want to go into a little bit deeper on what was the difference that you experienced, because it's accurate.
Well, I look at it as, Tecogen was the manufacturer. I've asked for a report. I actually have to make reports on an annual basis to the Department of Energy Resources. And they use that as a sales tool, so I've kind of got together with them and we've just kind of altered it a little bit and changed some numbers around so I can get the data that I want from it. And it's a good summary data, a good summary of the data, and we use it to kind of track the progress of energy savings. When we use about 10 million kilowatt hours a year of electricity and probably 42,000 decatherms of gas. And it's also been a good benchmarking tool, as I elaborated on a little bit, that we would be incorporating another one of these cogen units in our new dining hall. So,
yeah, there's a question in the back.
I'm associated with the Airport Commission, and I know that they were looking at putting solar into the parking lot so that you would have a covered parking lot now at the Worcester Airport, and the solar would generate enough electricity for them to run all of the utilities at the airport. And I was just wondering if Worcester State might have been involved in that research, or is it totally different with Massport?
yeah, that would be totally different with Massport, although we've explored that opportunity on campus ourselves. But at this point, anybody that's had the opportunity to drive through our campus lately, we've got 2 new buildings going in, and the place is quite chaotic until things shake out a little bit. But it's certainly something we would consider as well. Yeah, that parking situation's being addressed, and that property will be leased for a period of time.
Steve, I know you focused your presentation on the ROI of your energy investments, and obviously at that 3-year mark, you're really freed up and saving some capital. But you're also in a business, you're affiliating with hospitals, you're a community organization. Have you, on the marketing side, been able to take these energy efficiency and sort of green initiatives and use those to turn around and help present the business in a better light to both consumers and your sort of hospital partners? Has that made a difference sort of on that end and sort of how the company is branding itself?
That's an excellent question, and the answer is yes. I mean, we're trying to do more of that. We're trying to figure that out. Our marketing team is taking certainly the projects that we've done, and we're doing some other things as well that weren't in this presentation, and we're constantly, we're doing a lot of electronic marketing to our members, and we're utilizing that in our newsletters. We have monthly board meetings with our hospital. We're presenting to our hospital what we're doing. In fact, they were very pleased because in these retrofits, we were able to upgrade their spaces as well. And so for no dollars out of their own pocket. So we got huge leverage out of that. But yes, continuing to do that, it's something that a lot of our members really appreciate, that we're taking part in, the green initiatives.
There's a question out back.
Dan Cook from Conservation Solutions Corporation. Question about water efficiency. What kind of things have your campuses been doing on water efficiency and in terms of water reuse, and then just efficiency of equipment and reducing chemical use in, say, cooling towers and in other areas?
That actually, the water usage actually falls under part of that stretch code as well. So any new renovations, substantial renovations, new construction are all in low-flow bathroom fixture. Toilets are installed, urinals, things of that nature. With regards to process equipment, boiler chemistry, I mean, it's a fact of life. It's required in order to maintain the equipment properly. We do monitor it very closely. It's actually monitored by a chemical supply company under third-party contract. And testing's done monthly, especially during heating and cooling seasons. And, things are adjusted as required. We haven't experimented with any of the newer technology, the chemical-free aspect. We've had mixed input from some of our sister agencies that we've interacted with. So although we like to be leading edge, when we're messing with taxpayer dollars, we try to go with the tried and proven process. So not that we're, have any objection to it, but in the water conservation as a whole, I had mentioned we're looking at a new athletics center. From the water conservation perspective, other than heating and cooling or bathroom fixtures, we're actually going to do some rainwater harvesting, in which case we'll be capturing roof runoff and treating that water ever so slightly or subtly, and then using it for irrigation.
That's great. Are you also looking at your parking lots so that instead of having curbing and all sorts of drain off, that it actually goes into recharge areas that flows naturally into the recharge zone on the parking lot?
Yeah, and that's the whole concept of any of our new construction in Massachusetts, is especially on state facilities, would be direct recharge whenever possible. Our stormwater systems, and we do have a very intensive stormwater management program. We're actually required by the EPA. We fall under their NIPIDs program to comply with certain discharge limits, mostly qualitative versus quantitative. At this point, we're awaiting a new permit to be issued. But groundwater re-infiltration at the point of generation and stuff is a strong focus with any of our new construction. We do have and I'll just take this opportunity to plug, if you go to worcester.edu/green, we've got a whole host of stuff, and I very much broad brushed a lot of the different things that we're involved with over there, but it's actually a sustainability fair going on today and tomorrow. It's our 6th annual sustainability fair, in which case it's a fair amount of education, outreach, interaction with our faculty and other staff community as well, local community. So.
Anybody else? Thank you, guys. Going green means something different now. It helps your wallet. Thanks. You too.
Great to meet you.
Congratulations.
So, folks, let's thank this last panel. A terrific job. Thank you all for your time. Thank you, folks, for sitting in. We have now that you're released and we kept you here in between sessions, there's some light refreshments out in the exhibit area, and we can spend some more quality time with the folks who have booths here. And thank you so much to Vincent and our panel, Robert and Steve. Appreciate it. Okay. And I...
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also want to thank, just once again, National Grid and Hess Energy, Conover and Company, World Energy, WPI, and Curry Printing, the DC Youth Center, Elevation Exhibits, Mark Serra Productions. And if you look around this room and say, wow, this looks great, look at the lighting and this red stuff, that is our friends from Revelation Productions who are in the back of the room who do a terrific job with the setup here, and Ron Boulay Photography. So thank you all for coming, and have a great day.